The Extraordinary Disappointments of Leopold Berry by Ransom Riggs. Chapter 45. He crossed the night-shadowed city with the guide open on his lap, alternately stuffing his mouth with French fries and taking bites of a double cheeseburger. He was driving with his knees, looking down now and then to check his progress. Like a GPS, the star moved with him across the map, the symbol always leading the way. Washington to La Cienega, La Cienega to Olympic, Olympic through the glitzy neon carnival of Koreatown to the ragged edge of Pico Union. A smog-yellow moon rose through the wispy veil of clouds. He shoved more fries into his mouth. In classic LA fashion, traffic thickened for no apparent reason, and to avoid the worst of it, he cut down a side street. Immediately, the map shook and fluttered in his lap, and the arrow symbol marked the path from where he'd strayed began to glow an angry red. "All right, calm down," he muttered, finishing his double as he hooked a quick U-turn back into Olympic. The instant he returned to the path, the guide settled down. The arrow symbol returned to its previous calm shade of blue. Leopold drove the rest of the way without deviating from the recommended route, taking every turn demanded of him. The further he drove, the more the streets narrowed, downtown the high-rises looming ever closer. He wound a snaking path up to Union, then crossed under the 110 freeway and entered the 2nd Street Tunnel, the long concrete sarcophagus that cut beneath Bunker Hill. Greenish lights blurred overhead like Morse code. A pair of motorcycles roared past, filling the tunnel with fumes and thunder. Leopold looked down at the guide to confirm he was nearing the E symbol, then got a shock. Earlier, he'd been so intent on the journey that he'd only glanced at the destination. He'd assumed the entrance to Sunderhill would be near Angel's Flight, on the other side of the tunnel, but the E was smack in the middle. Peering more closely at the map, he saw that the entrance was actually down a short spur of tunnel that veered off to the left, not far ahead of him. There was only one problem with this. He'd driven through the 2nd Street Tunnel 100 times, and he knew for a fact there was no left turn. No turn in either direction. It was straight as an arrow, walls all the way. His head snapped up at the resonant blare of a horn. Leopold jerked the wheel straight, moving so quickly he nearly knocked over his soda. Putting himself to rights, he pretended not to notice the middle finger offered in his honor, averting his eyes as the offended car sailed past, still leaning on its horn. More cautious now, he scanned the tunnel ahead. He was rapidly approaching the theoretical entrance, but the walls were solid as far as he could see. No stopping any time was painted in huge letters along the left side. His eyes darted again to the guide. Now a few words had appeared above the glowing arrow. Exit boldly 500 feet. There, ahead of him on the left, the wall now shimmered, slightly translucent. Through what looked like a sheen of heat waves, he could just make out another spur of tunnel. And then he was upon it, and there was no time to second-guess anything. He floored the gas, yanked the wheel left, and exited boldly. To an operatic chorus of horns, he cut across oncoming traffic, steeled himself for sudden impact, and sailed through the half-transparent concrete. A snap of static electricity crackled as a flash of blue light danced across his windshield, and then he was through, his stomach lurching as the tunnel ramped upward precipitously. He rounded a sharp curve before leveling off. Only then, as brake lights came into view, did he think he let his foot off the gas. Leopold came to a skidding stop at the end of a short line of cars, his heart thudding, French fries littering the dashboard. It was the second time that day he'd channeled The Fast and the Furious, and he hadn't even seen those movies. There was much more of this in store for him. He was starting to think maybe he should. He remembered to breathe, straightened his spine, and scanned the scene out of the windshield. In front of him was a weathered pickup truck with a bumper sticker that read "Student Driver," one of many vintage cars, he noted, idling in the queue. At the front of the line was a booth, a guard, and a gate. Beyond that seethed the wall of grey mist. Leopold had arrived at some kind of checkpoint. The gate arm rose and an old Volkswagen van puttered through. The mist split open to receive it, then turned shut again after the van had passed. As the line of cars inched forward, Leopold felt a twinge of doubt. How exactly was he supposed to get in? What would he tell the guard? What if the guard knew he'd been banished from Sunder? He looked down at the guide. It offered no advice. Channeling Richter, Leopold pulled up to the booth, wearing his most accommodating smile, which faltered as soon as the guard swiveled in his chair to face him. It was Rochelle, the winged old lady from the underground parking garage. He still owed her a nickel. "You," she glared. "I know you from someplace." Leopold briefly squeezed his eyes shut. Of all the people she must have seen in that parking garage on a daily basis, he couldn't believe she remembered him. Yeah, listen, I'm sorry about that. I can pay you now if you've got change. You an actor? A pair of glasses hung from a beaded chain around her neck. She put them on and peered at him skeptically. Where have I seen your face? I'm not an actor, Leopold frowned. We met yesterday in the parking garage. A car honked impatiently. Nah, said Rochelle. She was tapping her chin when suddenly her face lit up. She reared back on her stool, cackling loudly. Holy hell, you're the Whoopsie kid! Leopold felt the blood drain from his face. What? I saw you on TV! You're that shit for brains who thought he was a channeler. I don't know what you're talking about, Leopold said, suddenly feeling sick. But if you could just let me through. No chance, you were banished, she said, wagging a finger at him as she picked up a heavy black phone. They want to talk to you. Pull over to the side, you're blocking traffic. Sunder PD will be here in 2 shakes. She raised the gate and waved him over, still laughing. Shit, Leopold hissed as he shifted into first gear, casting a light glance down at the guide. Yet again, it offered no help. Ahoy, Clarence! Rochelle was shouting into the phone. You'll never believe who just pulled up to my gate. No, dummy. I'll give you 2 guesses, and the first one don't count. You know what? Leopold muttered, hitting the gas. Fuck this. He swung a hard left to circle the booth, but the turn was too tight, and he had to brake before hitting the wall. Rochelle leapt out of her chair, wings ruffled and thrashing as she shouted into the phone. Leopold managed to extricate himself with a beautifully executed 3-point turn set to the soundtrack of a dozen wailing car horns. But just as he was about to speed away, wheels spinning, his car refused to budge. The mist had attached itself to his bumper and was dragging the car backward. Leopold kept his foot planted on the gas. After a tire-squealing moment, the mist's hold broke and he shot away, past the booth and back down the curving tunnel, Rochelle waving a fist in his rear view. A thick grey tendril pursued him, snapping at the window like a cobra until it could stretch no further. Finally, the mist evaporated. He skidded back into the main tunnel, merged with normal traffic and sped out into open streets as far as LA would allow. Only when he was several blocks away did he pull over. He sat there breathing like he'd run a race, a cold sweat beading his brow as he checked his mirrors for rogue appendages of mist. Leopold's head fell back against the headrest, his adrenaline slowly fading, leaving in its place a cold, terrifying humiliation. You're that shit for brains who thought he was a channeler. Apparently, he was famous. He remembered signing those waivers, remembered the executives explaining that the test would be filmed and broadcast to the public, and yet he never truly considered what failure might look like. He'd never considered failure at all. He'd been so damn sure he was special. Leopold dragged his hands down his face. It would have been easier, of course, to have left Sunder behind forever. Ideally, they'd have revised his memories like they were supposed to. Then he might have gone on being mediocre, nothing in privacy. A privilege it hadn't occurred to him to be grateful for. But for reasons he didn't understand, his mum needed him to return to a world that seemed to know his face, his choices, and the precise dimensions of his stupidity. And yet, Leopold Berry had failed many things in his life, but he couldn't bear to fail his mother. He bent to retrieve the guide. In all the chaos, it had fallen to the floor again. He opened it to downtown Los Angeles, then located his glowing blue star. Well, he said to the map, what am I supposed to do now? In response, it shuddered. Beside the blue route that had led him down the tunnel, the words Easy Way appeared. Then a second route glowed to life, this one marked by a new symbol, -X-X- arrow. This path led from his current location to the other side of Sunder Hill, where it narrowed to a thin and twisting thread, no more than a hiking trail, that ended at a red circled E, almost too faint to make out. Besides this more ominous-looking entrance appeared the words, Hard Way. With a reluctant shake of his head, Leopold shifted the car into first gear. He supposed nothing good in life had ever been easy. Chapter 46. Hard Way led him to the other side of the hill, where he was forced to leave his car in a sketchy parking lot by the freeway overpass. He clubbed the wheel, grabbed his duffel bag, and got out. The hiking trail commenced in the scrub behind the power station, its transformers humming and snapping in the night air. Unencumbered now by clouds, the moon cast a ghostly glow across the barren scenery. He followed a thin dirt track up the hill, so steep in places he had to stash the guide and haul himself along the spiky underbrush. Halfway up the incline, he paused to recover his breath. The freeway spread below him, a gleaming vein of endless, stuttering brake lights. A chilly breeze rustled the sage and sliced through his thin cotton t-shirt. For the second time in as many days, he wished he had a jacket. Finally, he crested the hill. The trail dead-ended at a chain-link fence from which hung a menacing octagonal sign. Trespassers will be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. He blinked, felt a slight pressure build in his ears, and the sign changed. Hungry mist. Enter at your own peril. Now he could see a wall of grey swirling beyond the fence. He stared at it for a moment, recalling a scene in episode 5 where Max actually befriended a patch of semi-sentient mist, but he knew nothing about angry mist of the border control variety. He pulled out the Thomas guide and double-checked the path ahead. Hardway led to the very spot where he stood, then continued on past the fence and the mist. Leopold stuffed away the guide, steeled himself, and jumped it, in the process activating what sounded like a gentle alarm. Once he'd landed on the opposite side, he spun around, searching the dark for the source of the noise. A small red bell. Someone had tied it to the fence. Unsure what to make of this, he turned to face the mist, a boiling, opaque barrier that stretched away endlessly in both directions. He heard a low, menacing rumble from within, and as he deliberated whether to be afraid or very afraid, he was startled by a shout. "Somebody rang?" It was a man's voice, hoarse but loud. It had come from beyond the mist. Leopold hesitated. "I did? Who's that?" "Larry." "Who?" "Larry. You coming through or what, Larry? I don't have all night." Leopold looked around. "Coming through how?" A pause. "You got legs?" If not, no problem. We'll do this a different way." "I've got legs." "Then why are you asking stupid questions, Larry? Run, and try to hold your breath." Leopold sighed, stifled his irritation, and then, holding his breath, gave it a running start. The next thing he knew, he was enveloped in it, mist dimming his view in all directions and clinging to his limbs like molasses, arresting his momentum to such a degree that after a few strides, he struggled to move forward even an inch. The mist roar was nearly deafening now, and he could only just hear the man shouting, "Grab my hand!" An outstretched arm appeared before him, and Leopold grasped it. With a sudden heave, he was pulled through to the other side. Leopold stumbled out into tall grass. He took in a deep lungful of night air, then tried to assess his surroundings. He was in a small clearing. A cracked asphalt path led away through a copse of trees. "Okay there, Larry?" The man who'd helped him was standing a few feet away in a patched coat and a furry, flap-eared cap. He untied a bandana that had been wrapped around his nose and mouth and stuffed it away in a pocket. The man was wall-eyed and had a thin beard that grew in disconnected patches, as if he'd suffered repeated shaving accidents. Despite all this, he looked pleased with himself as he untied a rope from his midsection and let it drop. The other end was staked to the ground behind him. "I think I'm okay, yeah. Thanks. Good thing you didn't try that without me." He flashed a gap-toothed smile. "Check yourself for clingers." Leopold looked down at himself. "Clingers?" The man nodded at Leopold's boots. "Don't want to take any of that with you?" Leopold bent to see a wisp of mist lingering on his boots, wriggling up his laces like an inchworm. He shuddered and shook it off, then stomped the squirming tendril under his heel for good measure, as if trying to kill the spider. There was a snort of laughter. "I think you got it." Leopold composed himself. "I'm Harney. Over there's French," he said, gesturing to a wooden bench beside the path, where a man piled with blankets lay curled and snoring beside a guttering lantern. "French, we got a customer. Rouse yourself." "Customer?" Leopold echoed. Harney grinned. "Do I stand here in the cold night for my health?" He let out a hacking asthmatic cough. "I do not." French stirred, the blankets falling away as he sat up and let out a hacking cough of his own. He wore a disheveled uniform with Department of Border Security and Mist Maintenance printed on it. "Right." Leopold frowned, feeling naive. "Of course not." Harney shoved his hands into his pockets and rocked back on his heels. "That'll be $50, please." "50? Fee for services rendered." French hooked a thumb toward the mist. "Of course, we can always toss you back into the churn." Leopold glanced behind him as the mist let out a particularly hungry-sounding rumble, then returned his eyes to the man. "I can give you 30. Harney exchanged a look with French, who was screwing a small flat cap onto his bald head, then turned back to Leopold. "Then that'll be $30, if you please." Leopold pulled a few bills from his duffel. $30 represented a sizable chunk of his total fortune, so it hurt a little as he pressed the money into Harney's hand. "Appreciate your business," Harney said as he pocketed the cash. "Exit through the trees, and don't forget to tell your friends." Leopold turned to leave, only to discover French staring at him. "Now wait just a minute," the man said, rising from the bench as his eyes narrowed on Leopold. "I'll be a street conjurer's monkey. You're him." "I'm not anyone," Leopold said, a small dread building as he backed away. "You're right, French." Harney shuffled closer to Leopold, inspecting his face in the moonlight. "It is him." "I don't know what you guys are talking about." "Don't worry," Harney said with a calculating grin. "We won't tell a soul. Do we snitch on clients with whom we do business? We do not." "So which way you headed?" French asked. Leopold couldn't have told the man even if he wanted to. He put all his faith in the enchanted and slightly cantankerous Thomas guide, which at the moment lay still and silent in his duffel. He only shook his head before walking away. Harney called after him. "Piece of advice, friend. If you go back to Sunderworld you've been banished from, it won't rest. It'll keep trying to spit you out, like a bit of an undigestible meat." Leopold slowed a moment, looking back. Harney gave him a pitying look. "You're an error in the system now." Chapter 47. Before long, he was bathed in pink light. The trees had cleared like curtains parting, and in the distance he glimpsed a familiar neon blur. Leopold cracked open the guide, double-checking his position along the easterly, abandoned-seeming end of what was called Vigda Street. The glowing path that stretched ahead of him was still marked Hardway. He tucked away the map, then readied himself. The evening breeze shook a strand of skeletal bushes. Leopold crossed from wild, scrubby grass through cigarette graveyards and unkempt medians. He jaywalked through a district of lonely warehouses and factories, then straight into the main strip of Sunder Hill. Familiar sights and smells jeering at him from all directions. The street was alive with shoppers and pedestrians. He kept his head down, passing landmarks he recognized. Norm's Magiporn and the portable hole in its window, still available for financing. Art's information post / Tumbleport station. Art himself inside, patronless, dusting the counter. The bright spot, bustling with patrons. Its bell jangled as a customer exited. The enticing smells of greasy food that escaped reminded Leopold, with a sharp pang, of a more hopeful time. Larry Berry of yesterday seemed like a distant memory. Keeping his eyes averted, Leopold ignored the aggressive offers of a street vendor selling cheap souvenirs from a push cart. The guide wanted him to walk 3 blocks down the busiest stretch of Sunder Hill, before turning onto Bradley Street. Clearly, the guide had no idea Leopold was both a laughingstock and a wanted man. He'd just have to be careful. So committed was Leopold to keeping his head down that he was nearly run over by 3 teenagers on skateboards who seemed to be propelling themselves by means of a cheap focuser. He ducked into an alley and flattened himself against a brick wall. Taking a breath, he finally allowed himself to look up. A billboard shone brightly across the street. Beside a picture of a 3-eyed man peeking over a pair of sunglasses, it read, "Stay vigilant. If you see something, say something." At that exact moment, 2 beefy guys in tan uniforms strode toward him down the alley, one carrying a burlap sack tied shut with a knotted chain. Leopold could do nothing then but turn his attention to a heap of trash near his feet and hope to go unnoticed. Something inside the sack rustled, jangling the chain. "Don't worry," one of the men said as they trundled past. "Thing's out like a light. Probably dreaming about eating someone's cat." Realizing they were talking to him, Leopold risked a look in their direction. Stitched on the back of their uniforms was Balthasar's Pest Control. He knew then there was a Noxum in that bag. It had to have been a small one, maybe one of the minor residential-grade subspecies that could be repelled if the ubiquitous advertisements were to be believed, with a few spritzes of Noxum spray. Leopold had his doubts, as he now knew from experience some of the deadliest looked perfectly unthreatening at first glance, and he shuddered, remembering the nightmarish janitor stepping out of his skin suit. The creature let out a sudden hiss and clawed at him from inside the bag. Leopold spun away to face the wall. "Sorry about that," one of the guys called over to him, laughing. "Little bastards won't even let you take a leak in peace, huh?" Leopold made a strangled sound. "They're in rare form lately," the other guy added. "Something's got 'em all riled up." On a busy week, we get 2-3 call-outs, but lately we've been getting 2 or 3 a day. This little sweetheart came up through a lady's shower drain while she was shampooing her hair. He chewed one of her toes off. Wow, Leopold said noncommittally. His eyes were still fixed on the wall. He was theoretically supposed to be taking a leak, but this did nothing to deter the conversation. Last job of the day, at least. Not sure what's gotten into them. Must be an error in the system. They wandered off, out of sight and earshot, those last words ringing in Leopold's ears. It was the same thing Harney had said to him. You're an error in the system now. Error in the system. Apologies for the ethic glitch. You're on with Jakey. And Jamila. So don't touch that remote. That's right, folks. You demanded, and we're here to deliver a 2-hour commercial-free marathon. Leopold looked around, trying to locate the sound of the perky voices. He peered through split fingers as he moved toward the sound. An eerie feeling blazed through him as he left the alley and approached the familiar storefront. He came to a halt in front of the display. Just last night he'd stood here. Just last night he'd been hypnotized, no, inspired, by the glaring pyramid of boxy television screens. Now he watched, horrified, as new footage unspooled before his eyes. His hands fell, dead weight to his sides. Motherfucker, he breathed. You say, Jamila? We've been pulling callers all night, but I know everyone wants to hear from you. When do you think it all started going downhill for Lunch Trail Larry? Jamila flashed a knowing smile at the camera. Glad you asked, Jakey. They cut to a clip of Leopold looking overconfident in the remnants of his filthy, ill-fitting suit, the grotesque Noxum swinging from a light in the rafters. Leopold watched, dread mounting, as an on-screen Larry balled his fists against his chest like a moron, as if he were a superhero from a comic book, then let them fly. This theatrical gesture was undercut by the pathetic results of his focuser, which produced a limp spray of reddish sparks then fizzled out midair. Whoopsie! Cried yesterday's Larry. Jamila and Jakey, their talking heads gleaming on a dozen screens, burst into peals of laughter, pearly teeth flashing as they guffawed. Think we need to watch that again? Leopold watched himself say whoopsie over and over, his legs crossing in the aftermath like a little boy who needed the bathroom. The chiron on the bottom of the screen read, Lunch Trail Larry, channel a test gone wrong. Phone lines open. We want to hear from you. Leopold stepped back, disorientated, as the din of the streets around him rose in his ears. He heard the bustle of shoppers, whoopsie, and a blast of a car horn. A ruckus burst of laughter. Whoopsie! Leopold stumbled, startling as hands pushed at him. He spun around, breathing fast, realizing too late that he'd, whoopsie, bumped into a couple on a late evening stroll. Leopold heard one of them shout, their voices indistinct, and he practically ran back to the darkened alley, deaf to all but his thundering heart as he sank against his filthy wall and slid to the ground. A tide of humiliation swept over him like nothing he'd ever experienced. No lecture of Richter's had ever made him feel so unworthy. No cliched high school indignity had ever made him feel so small. He'd never seen himself reflected this way. Had never seen himself in such a pathetic light. All these years, he'd believed his efforts at faked confidence had been fooling people. He'd thought he'd been putting on a pretty good show. He hadn't realized the world could see straight through him. Mortification coiling in the pit of his stomach, Leopold heaved himself upright. He'd been many things in his life, passive, pathetic, indecisive, but he resolved then and there that he'd never again be a coward. He turned and stalked back to Victor Street the way he'd come, head firmly down until he reached the souvenir cart he'd passed earlier. Working quickly, he searched its rack of trinkets until he found an LA Dodgers cap and a cheap pair of knockoff Ray-Bans. He ripped off the tags, donned the hat and glasses, and tossed the tags onto the little counter. How much for these? He asked, avoiding the vendor's gaze. Leopold didn't hear the man's reply. He was frozen in renewed horror, his eyes having landed on a rack of novelty T-shirts, all which bore the same image of him. Below a grainy black and white photo of Lunch Tray Larry, legs crossed like a drunken ballerina, was a single bold-faced word. Whoopsie. He wasn't just famous in Sunder. He'd become a fucking meme. If you get a keychain too, I'll knock off $5, the vendor was saying. No thanks, Leopold muttered, placing the bills on the counter. There was a loud cha-ching as the register opened. If you're interested in the shirts, the vendor went on, counting the cash, I'd grab one before they're gone. It's a limited print run. You know what? Said Leopold, forcing a smile. Keep the change. Leopold continued on toward Bradley Street, taking his time now as he kept an eye out for paladins or Sunder police officers. He didn't care if he looked ridiculous wearing a hat and sunglasses at night. In fact, Leopold was surprised to find that he no longer cared about much of anything. He'd already hit rock bottom. The map forced him to retrace his steps, which meant soon he was passing the electronics store and its pyramid of TVs again, still rehashing his myriad humiliations. Leopold forced himself to stop and stare at his own image, at the version of himself he was determined to leave behind. Leopold of yesterday was holding up 2 broken halves of a lunch tray, and then, one quick cut later, peeling bologna from his face as he climbed out of a trash can. "What an idiot," muttered a woman who'd paused to watch. Can't blame the poor guy," said the man beside her. "I guess everyone thinks they're the hero." Leopold, swallowing against a knot of emotion, turned and kept walking. It was a surprising relief to discover that, having been stripped wholly of his dignity, he was left only with fire. Chapter 48. Leopold looked down at the guide in his hands, then up at the building in front of him. Again at the guide, once more at the building. He'd arrived at his destination. He could practically hear the GPS voice in his head. It was nothing like what he'd expected. Then again, he wasn't sure what he'd expected. The building was straight out of a horror movie, exactly the kind of thing an LA developer would salivate over. A once grand 3-story Victorian with its paint peeling scabriously, balcony clinging to the facade by a few bent nails. It wasn't abandoned, though maybe it deserved to be. Light shone in the 1st and 2nd floor windows, and a sign above the porch read, "Goldie's Rooming House, unhaunted rooms to let. Reasonable rats." The E, I think, is crossed out there. Casting a paranoid glance behind him, he climbed 5 crooked steps to the porch. An old man in an old suit, smoking 3 cigarettes, regarded him suspiciously from a folding chair, as if weighing whether Leopold was a door-to-door salesman or an off-duty murderer. Leopold checked to ensure his hat was covering his hair, then adjusted his sunglasses and pushed open the front door. He entered a cramped and funereal reception area. Creepy porcelain statuary in the corners, threadbare floral carpeting, roses dried black in dust-skinned vases. Skittering sounds echoed behind the peeling wallpaper, and Leopold surrendered to an impulse to place his hands against it, the panel so soft with mold he could feel the patter of tiny feet from the other side. He approached the check-in desk, imprisoned inside a wire cage. Within it sat a giant raw-boned clerk who looked like he hadn't risen from his chair in years. He reclined with his shoes propped on the desk, slurping takeout noodles while chuckling at a small, squawking television before him. A sign on the cage advertised rates for a monthly, daily, and forever. Clerk didn't bother glancing up. "All we got left is haunted rooms, top floor, no elevator, hot water from 5 to 7 a.m., bathroom down the hall," he said, his eyes on the TV. "It ain't the Ritz." Leopold was about to reply when he heard a familiar voice. "Whoopsie!" The man wheezed with laughter between slurps, fine mist of soy sauce spritzing the air. Jackass. Leopold's jaw tensed. "Mind if I look around before I decide?" "Knock yourself out." Beyond the desk was an arrow-shaped sign that read, "Guest Rooms," and pointed at the staircase. To the left, an arched doorway opened onto a common room, where a chandelier cast pallid light on a collection of sad characters. Leopold drew further into the room. It smelled of stale, trapped air. A few elderly people dozed in armchairs around a barely going fireplace. A woman who might have been in her 2nd century of life shuffled back and forth past a grandfather clock, obsessively adjusting the aperture on a cracked focuser, conjuring only faint traces of light in the process. An age-darkened oil painting of a shipwreck hung above a piano with half its keys missing. He wondered if the place was a rest home for aged sparks. At the very least, it appeared to be a refuge of last resort, a catchment for the unwanted and the desperate. When Leopold was satisfied no one was watching, he pulled out the guide. His blue star pulsed gently at the rooming house on Bradley Street, where the hardway path appeared to end. Now a small addendum had appeared at the top of the page. Kindly turn to Appendix A. Flipping to the back, he found the appendix and a diagram of the rooming house, a new blue star glowing inside a roughly rectangular floor plan of the space he currently occupied. Then, before his eyes, a fresh route brightened to legibility. It led from the common room to the staircase, then traced a path to one of the upper floor guest rooms. Several warnings interrupted the path as it ascended. "Take great care. Dash exclamation mark, dash exclamation mark dash to perceived unobserved dash exclamation mark dash exclamation mark dash exclamation mark, can't say exclamation, I apologize, dash right arrow. With a jolt, he realized he was within a few hundred feet of whatever his mum had meant for him to find. He felt at once an ache and a longing. For all that was, for all that might have been, for whoever he might be on the other side. Leopold adjusted his clothes, squared the duffel on his back, and tucked the guide under his arm. With a last look at the distracted desk clerk, he mounted the stairs as quietly as its groaning steps would allow. His heart was racing now, his mind reeling with the possibilities of what lay ahead. The guide wanted him to go to the third floor. Reaching the landing of the second, he detected motion down the hall and shrank into a dark corner. He waited until an old woman shuffled into one of the rooms, then closed the door behind her. He continued up the next flight of stairs. Each step produced a little shriek, as if the building itself were objecting to his ascent. He grew only more anxious as he climbed, sensitive to the slightest sounds and movements. A prickle at the nape of his neck alerted him to something, a presence somewhere below, and he sped up, taking the stairs 2 at a time until he reached the top, where he backed into a wall, chest heaving. He hesitated, listening for the approach of footsteps or the chatter of some stray guest, and only when he was convinced he was utterly alone did he turn his gaze once more to the guide. The marked path continued past a series of doors and around a corner, where it terminated at a circled E symbol. He checked one final time to make sure no one was near, moved down the hall as quickly and quietly as he could, took a sharp left, and arrived at the endpoint. Steadying himself, he looked around. This section of hallway seemed decidedly unimportant, and then down at the guide. The entire page had blanked. There was no floor plan anymore. No map. All that remained were a few lines of bold text, red ink bright against a page that was now warm to the touch. 5 paces east. Knock 3 times on the knotted panel, not too loud. Follow the passage to its end. Then 4 paces forward, 3 left, kneel, and knock again. That was all. The ink, vivid when he'd first begun to read, was already fading. He chased all else from his mind and scanned the words twice more, reading slowly and whispering each step aloud. By the time he'd committed it to memory, the page was blank. Chapter 49. Leopold had done precisely as the guide had instructed, and still he was baffled. He stood now before the knotted panel, on which he knocked 3 times. Nothing had happened. He wasn't sure whether he should try knocking a 4th time. Leopold was starting to freak out. "Open, goddammit!" he whispered, tossing a look over his shoulder. The hallway was still mercifully vacant, but his panic was reaching a crescendo. He pressed his hand flat against what was, theoretically, an entrance, hoping he might be able to push it open through sheer force. When this, too, failed, he could no longer rein in his alarm. "Shit, shit, shit," each word accompanied by a strike of his fingers. Only then, miraculously, did the panel slide away, but Leopold was more relieved than triumphant. He pushed through the gap and crouched into near darkness, proceeding on hands and knees through the thick dust in what appeared to be an old ventilation shaft, or something like a crawl space. The dust, combined with a muggy, clinging heat, made it difficult to breathe. Worse, the passage narrowed as he went, and soon he was flat on his stomach, forced to shimmy past unsnapped mousetraps and nets of cobwebs, while dragging his duffel bag behind him with one foot. Weak, light gas through the cracks in the floorboards that brushed his head, sufficient to identify the occasional rodent corpse, but little else. If he suffocated here, he thought, they'd never find him. After what felt like an indeterminate stretch of darkness, he thumped against what he hoped was the end, and then another panel swung open directly overhead. He stood up and burst through it, gasping for air. At first he thought only of breathing, head swimming as he filled his lungs. Only then did he allow himself to freak out in full. The claustrophobia, the spider webs he'd snagged in his teeth, the stench of mildew and that sharp, clinging odor of decomposed rat still lingering in his nose. Blinking steadily, horrors gradually abating, he looked around. He'd emerged from the floor in the middle of what appeared to be someone's hotel room. Leopold hoisted himself the rest of the way out of the hole in the floor, then reached down for his duffel, which he hung across his chest before standing. Squares of pale moonlight on floral wallpaper. The narrow bed was made, sheets tucked tightly, an oversized Hello Kitty t-shirt draped carefully over the edge. A stack of books teetered on a nightstand. There was no ensuite bathroom, just a leaky sink in the corner. It dripped like an irregular heartbeat. An old wardrobe had been left cracked open, allowing a view of a few neatly hung clothes. Most conspicuous of all was a suitcase by the door, as if the owner was preparing for a quick exit. Whoever was staying here didn't intend to stay long. They had that in common. 4 paces forward, 3 left, kneel, and knock again. It occurred to him with some trepidation that the guide's instructions was not indicating how long the paces should be, or what forward meant relative to previous directions. Apprehension was clouding his head, making it difficult to focus. He pressed his eyes shut, and in the brief stillness, an old song popped into his mind unbidden. Come on, Sparks, it's time for adventure, a secret passage in a wizard's tomb, magic spells and treasures to find, monsters lurking in your room. Get your key, heed the call, Sunderworld awaits us all. He let out a low, bitter laugh. It had once been the theme song to his life, hummed in moments of quiet, sung aloud in the shower. It sounded ridiculous to him now. He forced his thoughts back to the task at hand. 4 paces forward, 3 left, kneel, and knock again. He regarded the passage from which he'd emerged. He found the knotted panel easily enough, so he figured an average stride length should suffice. Forward probably referred to the direction he faced when he'd stood up from the hole, which was the same direction he'd been facing during his belly crawl through the passage. He took 4 careful, even steps forward, turned 90 degrees left, then took 3 more steps until he stood atop a section of gently warped floor that looked like all the other parts of the gently warped floor. He knelt down, ready to tap 3 times, when he heard an unprompted click, then the mechanical thunk of a tumbler turning in a lock. He was confused for a moment, wondering how the panel had anticipated his knock. Then he realized it wasn't the floor. Someone was opening the door to the room. He looked around frantically, considered diving under the bed or into the wardrobe, then realized that if he did, he'd lose the spot he'd worked so hard to find. He leapt to his feet just as the door swung open, then stiffened as the stranger entered, his head ringing like a struck bell. It wasn't a stranger exactly. It was her. The girl from yesterday. She'd watched him from a corner booth at the Bright Spot, arresting him with both her beauty and her suspicion. Later, she'd appeared like a phantom in the middle of his test. He'd never forget seeing her face right before he got backhanded into a trash can by a Noxum. And now this, his 3rd sighting. Of all the neighborhoods, of all the flop houses, and all the rooms in Sunder, she just happened to occupy the one that contained his mother's secret. This could not be a coincidence. He suspected it, of course, the second time he'd seen her, but now he was certain. She'd been following him. The absurdity of the situation was clear even as his eyes narrowed. He stood now in her room, by all accounts the asshole who'd inadvertently broken into her private space, yet he felt an unnerving flash of anger as he realized that all along he'd been marked. What the hell are you doing here? They both shouted at the same time. She went still for an instant, lips parting in shock, then quickly found her voice. This is my room, she said, her green eyes wide with outrage. Why have you been following me? He shot back. He couldn't explain it. Couldn't explain why his many frustrations sharpened to a point aimed in her direction. But it had just occurred to him that, other than art, hers was the only face he'd seen repeated in Sunder. Are you out of your mind? She was saying. You broke into my room, and instead of apologizing, you're yelling at me? I'm not yelling, he said. And I'm sorry for breaking into your room. I didn't know it was your room. Then get the hell out, she shouted, flinging her arm at the open door behind her. No. The girl went slack with disbelief. You must be insane. I'm going to ask you one more time. His jaw tightened. Why have you been following me? Why didn't you tell me what you're doing in my room? No chance. Leopold was probably angrier than he should have been. He felt a strange heat gathering in his chest as he watched her. The way she slapped her dark bangs out of her eyes. The way she stood there insolently, all 5 feet of her vibrating with rage. She was wearing a heavy forest green cloak pulled straight from the bins of a discount Halloween store. All she was missing was a pointy witch's hat, a jack-o'-lantern, trick-or-treat bag, and a parent to chaperone. If he hadn't been so angry, he might have thought it was cute. She turned and slammed the door shut, which was startling. She took a careful step toward him and reached into her cloak. Leopold felt the hair rise along his arms. She was about to murder him? Did it matter? If she forced him somehow to leave this spot, he'd lose everything anyway. He was so close, inches from an opportunity that might never come again if he let it slip away. No, he wouldn't leave without the thing he'd come for. "Now I'm going to ask you one more time," she said, drawing out her hand. It held a focuser, small and tarnished with age, its lens glimmering with some spell that was already locked and loaded. "What the hell are you doing here?" "Wow." Leopold was almost impressed. "You're really willing to kill me over this," he said quietly. "You must be a really excellent person." "You have no idea," she said evenly. "I don't know who put you up to this or how you got in here, but if you turn around right now and crawl back from where you came from, Larry," she nodded to the open trap in the ground, "I'll think about letting you keep your face." "My name isn't Larry." "I know," she said flatly. "It's the lunch tray, Larry." His eyes flashed. "My name," he said, "is Leopold." Quickly, before he could change his mind, he tapped his boot on the floor 3 times. She let out a horrified gasp as a small panel flipped open at Leopold's feet. He dropped to his knees, reached into the hole, and fished out a velvet box the size of a thick paperback. It was substantial, and he weighed it in his hands. He expected a sudden lightheadedness, like a long-distance runner nearing the finish line. He recognized the box. He knew it quite well, in fact. It belonged to his mother. "Put that down," the girl hissed, fear lighting her eyes. He met her gaze slowly, glaring with a righteous indignation he'd felt only one other time in his life. That morning, when he'd faced down Richter. "Why'd you have this?" he demanded. "Because it's mine, you idiot!" "Liar!" Leopold said furiously. "This belongs to me!" Now she panicked, her focuser all but forgotten. "Okay, wait," she said, backing away. "Don't open it. You don't understand." Leopold was done listening. He shot the girl a defiant look before flipping open the box. And for a vanishing instant, he saw the object hool in a gleam of moonlight. It was a focuser. Unlike any he'd seen, the width of his hand but nearly flat, the gold circumference of its housing etched with the delicate aperture marks, its thin lens glinting. The girl screamed. Leopold looked up, startled, to see her diving for cover. A high metallic sound snapped his attention back to the box, where the focuser had risen from its bed of velvet to hover in the air. 6 sharpened spikes popped out around its housing like little teeth, and then it flung itself at him, hitting Leopold square in the chest. He reeled from the impact, dropping the box and gasping as he was seized by a sudden shock of pain. Razor-sharp barbs cut straight through his clothes to embed themselves in his flesh. From the fallen box came a flash of blinding light and searing heat, and with that, a crash so obliterantly loud, he thought his head was cracking open. He clung to consciousness long enough to feel himself being lifted off his feet and blown across the room, and then the world and everything in it was blotted out, lost in black, gone. Chapter 50. One by one, the lights dimming up on the darkened stage, Leopold's senses returned to him. First the smell of frying sausage, then coffee, its enticing aroma coaxing him from a deep hole. As the roaring in his head dulled to a loud hum, he could identify the puttering of a coffee maker, the pop and spatter of oil in a pan. Someone was making him breakfast. His eyes slit open. Once he blinked away a stubborn blur, he was greeted by the sight of an unfamiliar wood-beamed ceiling. Overstuffed bookshelves climbed a pale green wall. Mismatched chairs clustered around a weather-beaten coffee table. Morning sun filtered through the curtained window, the mop-top fringes of palm trees visible outside. Daytime. He'd been out the whole night. The girl's face swam into view, her green eyes shimmering among the dark spots in his vision. "Leopold?" she was saying, peering down at him. "You awake?" He tried to summon a reply, but his chest felt like a tin can being crushed. His head throbbed painfully as a burst of fireworks went off behind his eyes. As it faded, scattered floaters appeared in their place. He dipped his chin to look down at the length of himself. He was stretched out on a lumpy brown couch, his tall frame occupying all of it. "Leopold? Can you talk?" He must have mumbled some word of affirmation, because she looked profoundly relieved. "Oh, you're okay," she said, exhaling. Then over her shoulder, "He's okay." "I thought you wanted me dead," Leopold managed to say. "Not yet," a fleeting grin. "My reaction might have been premature." He tried to frown, but laughed instead, the sound hoarse and weak. "Where the hell am I?" "My Uncle Norm's place," she said. "You hungry? He makes a killer breakfast." A spasm of pain branched across Leopold's sternum, taking his breath away. His hand went to his chest, where it encountered something alien and metallic. It was the same object that had sprung out at him like some nightmarish jack-in-the-box. What appeared to be a focuser, a disc of gold and glass 4 or 5 inches in diameter, vacuumed tight against the mangled fabric of his blood-speckled t-shirt. He pried at its edges with rising urgency, remembering the shock he'd felt as the spikes had dug into him, but his fingers could find no purchase. Gritting his teeth, he forced himself partially upright just as a new character came into view. Over the girl's shoulder, he saw a scraggly, slightly absurd-looking man with wild greying hair and a short goatee. He wore, of all things, a pair of puffy red oven mitts and a striped brown bathrobe. "Go easy, brother, go easy." The man hurried forward, concern on his face as he said, "You had a hell of a night. Can you sit up all the way? Let's sit you up." Then he and the girl were sliding their arms beneath Leopold, lifting him until he was seated with his back against the couch. The girl smiled as she knelt in front of him, her energy strangely intense, eyes darting between Leopold and the uncle. Her attitude made no sense. Just last night, she'd been threatening him with death, after which he'd nearly gotten them both killed. He could see the singes and burns from the explosion on her cloak, even on the high-necked shirt she wore underneath it. Which reminded him, manners. "Hey, thank you," he said, feeling awkward as he looked her over. "I basically blew up your hotel room and wait." His brow furrowed. "Why did you save me?" Color heightened in her cheeks. "I didn't save you." "You could have left me to die," Leopold pointed out, "or get picked up by the cops. Sunder has cops, right?" "Yeah, and you would have deserved it, too." Something shone in her eyes, a secret depth of humor. "Some creep breaks into my room, then tries to steal from me?" "Hey, I didn't steal from you." "A thief and a liar. Impressive. I can't believe I wasted a podcast rescuing you." "Isabel!" Her uncle's bushy eyebrows shot up. "You cast your way back here? How many times have we talked about this?" Leopold clung to the scrap of information. Her name was Isabel. Her cheeks flushed brighter. "It was an emergency. What about the gateway watch I made for you? You said it was only designed to transport one person at a time. Plus I had to take his bag, my books, anything the police might have used to identify us." "Right," Norm said, relenting with a nod. "That's why you've been so exhausted." He sighed roughly. "Well, please don't ever do that again." "I won't." She leaned over and gave her uncle a kiss on his craggy cheek. "Probably." Looking beleaguered, Norm tugged off his oven mitts. His finger was festooned with rings of all types, as eclectic in style as the weather-beaten furniture scattered around the room. He turned to Leopold and said, with no preamble, "Close your eyes." "Why?" Norm pinched at some powder from a small jar and blew it into Leopold's face. Leopold responded with something between a choking sound and a violent cough, but before he could unleash a word of profanity, the pains in his body began to subside. "Feel a little better?" Norm asked. Leopold blinked, then nodded gratefully, testing his joints. "Brain salt. Packs a punch, huh? It's my own patented recipe. Can practically bring the dead back to life. Which, lucky for you, wasn't necessary." He laughed, the mound of grey and curly hair atop his head quivering, then squirreled the jar into his bathrobe. He looked like a benevolent madman crossed with a past-his-prime surfer, his skin tanned and leathered from a lifetime of sun exposure. Isabel, grinning practically ear to ear, looked like an adorable elf. Leopold couldn't help smiling back. He felt a little dopey and couldn't decide which weird thing, the brain salts, the focus of suction to his chest, or Isabel's disarmingly sunny disposition, was responsible for the endorphins now flooding through him. He realized he had no good reason to trust either of them. The fact that Isabel had saved his life was obviously a point in their favor, but he'd yet to make sense of their motivations. He squinted as he looked around the cozy, cluttered living room, then tilted his head at Norm. "This is your place?" "Surpassingly excellent deduction." Norm spread his arms expansively, and Leopold saw that under his bathrobe he wore pajama pants and a well-worn Metallica Ride the Lightning shirt. "You find yourself in my humble casa, the Chateau El Royale Apartments, finest magical accommodations this side of Chawega. Are we in Sunderhood? "Yes, indeed. Hollywood. Had to get you out of Sunder Hill before our cops snapped you up. My name's Norman. Call me Norm. And I believe you've met my niece Isabel." Leopold didn't bother telling Norm he'd already figured out their names. "So," Norm nodded at him. "You're Larry, right?" The warm feeling vanished. Leopold gestured to the kitchen. "I think your eggs are burning." Norm jumped up and bolted out of the room, shouting, "Damn, I left the burner on," while Isabel stifled a laugh. Then it was just the two of them. It was a little awkward for Leopold, sitting across from someone who'd so recently threatened to kill him, but Isabel seemed to be struggling even more. For some reason, she couldn't seem to look directly at him, and when she finally risked the glance, her eyes betrayed her mood. This was a fascinating discovery for Leopold, who'd never been fluent in the language of girls, but even now, as he studied the floor between them, he felt almost as if he could read her thoughts. She was dying to ask him something. He was determined to beat her to it. "Why didn't you kill me?" he said, the words coming out more sharply than intended. She'd been about to speak, her lips parted. She sounded surprised when she said, "You seem disappointed." "I'm just trying to understand," he said. "I'm not ungrateful. If I tell you the truth, will you promise not to be an asshole about it?" "No." This earned him a grin, which made him smile in turn, and now he was getting distracted again. "Okay. Truth is, I only saved your life because..." She looked down at his shirt and the object embedded there. "Well, it turns out you're kind of important." Leopold's hand raised to touch the focuser, fingers brushing glasses and cold, inhuman metal. He'd never been described as important by anyone ever. It was nearly as disconcerting as the thing on his chest. "Important?" he said, finding his voice. "Important how?" She canted her head at him, then shrugged. "You were able to activate the object." Stunned, Leopold opened his mouth to reply, but before he could think of what to say, a shout came from the kitchen. "All right, kids, breakfast ready." Chapter 51. Briefly, blissfully, Leopold was lost in a domestic daydream. He'd been watching Norm wheel around the cluttered, sunny kitchen in a kiss-the-cook apron, sound of popping grease and smells of cooking food filling the room with warmth. On the pink-tiled counter, a standard-issue coffee maker percolated beside old-looking appliances of unknown and possibly magical function. Swooping chrome letters spelled "Magifreeze" across the fridge door, which was covered with magnets, recipes, handwritten lists, and kid art, presumably vintage Isabel. Contemporary Isabel ferried steaming dishes and platters to the table. Before long, Leopold's plate was piled with scrambled eggs, generously buttered toast, and hash browns all dusted with what Norm called ether flakes, which glinted like spun sugar in a slant of window light. The whole scene felt like a delicate fantasy that would crumble at the slightest disturbance, so Leopold sat completely still and tried to ignore the drumbeat of the object, the focuser, the thing on your chest. "Turns out you're kind of important." He risked it all for a bite of fried potato, forking one from his plate and popping it into his mouth. A quiet wow escaped his lips. Despite everything that might have put a damper on his appetite, the million questions pinballing through his brain, the object, the questioning that awaited him, Leopold ate like eating was going out of style. Rather than a kaleidoscope of changing flavors, Norm's eggs and toast and potatoes actually tasted like eggs and toast and potatoes, but perfect ones. He wondered if it was Norm's cooking or there was something about the ether he'd dusted over everything, which, in addition to effervescing delightfully on his tongue, made Leopold feel like his bones were growing more solid with each bite. He even felt a little bit of that old familiar heat returning to the pit of his belly, like his reservoir of magical energy, shallow though it might have been, was slowly refilling. "Glad you're digging the food, man," said Norm, chuckling into his coffee mug. Leopold pulled his elbows off the table, attempting table manners at the 11th hour, then pushed back his empty plate. "That was delicious. Even better than the food at the Bright Spot." Isabel frowned. "Uncle Norm's cooking is way better than that slop." Speaking of which, the Bright Spot was the first place he'd seen her, and he still didn't know what she'd been doing there watching him. "Compliment accepted is," Norm practically gleamed. "In another life, I would have had one of those cooking shows. Forking around with Norm. I actually worked up a whole pitch for it, but every studio in town passed." After a moment, he muttered, "Their loss." "You said there's ether in it," Leopold said, noting the warmth still radiating through him. "Just a touch. All natural, though, not the synthetic crap most restaurants serve nowadays. Gives your ether levels a healthy, long-lasting boost, especially when they've been drained from overuse." He shot a disapproving glance at Isabel, then looked back at Leopold. "Does wonders for your hair and nails, too." Leopold suddenly tensed, then yelped, startled by a spasm of pain across his chest. The focuser, which had been dormant for some time, had fled to life with a sudden searing heat. "You okay?" Isabel said, rising from her chair in alarm. "Yeah," said Leopold, still wincing. The metal cooled as quickly as it had warmed, and gradually he relaxed. "I'm fine." "You sure?" Isabel asked, and at his repeated assurance, she sat down again. Norm waved his fork at the two of them. Not to worry. I checked the thing out while you were sleeping. Plus, I inspected it thoroughly long before you activated it. I'm sure it's uncomfortable, but it shouldn't be harmful to the wearer. He laughed breezily. If it was, you'd be dead already, am I right? Right, Leopold said uneasily. I don't suppose you could tell me what it is, or does. He shifted in his chair. Or how to get it off me? Well, Norm took a contemplative sip of coffee. The thing is, we don't exactly know. He took another sip. In fact, we were hoping you could help us test out some theories. Leopold rubbed absently at the metal ring on his chest. What kind of theories? Norm leaned back in his chair and crossed one leg over the other, a fuzzy slipper bobbing off the end of his big toe. Well, let's start with some backstory. We discovered the object 3 weeks ago. It showed up at my shop late one night, left on the doorstep with no explanation. Boxed in a metal crate. No note, nothing, Isabel added. Though it's not entirely weird for things to get dropped off like that, given my uncle's line of work. I'm in the asset revival game, Norm explained. You've heard of Norm's magic horn, Isabel said. It wasn't a question. Wait, you're that Norm? Leopold sat up a little straighter, gaping at the apron-clad man before him. Emmett would lose his shit if he knew. Here that is? You're living with a celebrity. Isabel rolled her eyes. So yeah, Norm went on, still preening. Sometimes people give me things to sell on consignment, but even the ones who want to remain anonymous leave a note. A hopeful price, some cryptic way to contact them. But here's this crate and no nothing. He stood up suddenly and crossed to the kitchen window, then peeked outside before sliding the pane shut. Can't be too careful, he murmured. The walls have ears around here, sometimes literally. Instead of returning to his seat, he began to pace. As soon as I opened it, I knew it was something special. The materials, the craftsmanship. He shook his head, in awe just picturing it. I've seen, handled, bought, sold, dismantled, and repaired just about every kind of enchanted, cursed, or charmed object you can imagine. But never anything like this. This is a diamond of the first water. From the looks of it, I figured it was a focuser, but I haven't gathered enough evidence to prove or disprove the theory. All I know for sure is that it was forged from ancient, extremely rare materials, custom made, no doubt, by a very heavy individual. But you can bet your ass there are similarly heavy individuals who do just about anything to get their hands on it. His tone lowered, darkened. That's why we moved it. Strangers were showing up, sparks I've never seen in Sunder before, sniffing around my shop with no intention of buying anything. I got the idea they were looking for the object, so we stashed it at Goldie's, where no one goes if they can help it, and booby-trapped the thing. Leopold gaped at him. You blew me up? You blew yourself up, Norm corrected him. And most of the room, Isabel added. But not the object itself, said Norm, pointing at Leopold's chest. Totally unscathed. Wait, what about the rest of him? Isabel was staring curiously at Leopold. What about the rest of me? Your head's still attached to your body. And you're upset about that? Don't get me wrong, I'm glad you weren't decapitated. She turned her attention to Norm. But shouldn't he have been more dead? The blast wasn't supposed to be lethal, Norm said. You can't interrogate a dead thief. But it blew up in his hands, and he still has all his fingers. She glanced at Leopold's hands as if to verify. Is it possible the object's some kind of shield? Seems unlikely, but I can't rule it out. Norm scratched his chin. I'm still betting it is exactly what it appears to be. A focuser. One we couldn't get to work. He looked at Leopold. But you did. Leopold peered down at his chest, at the torn cotton and dried blood of his shirt. I don't think this is the definition of working. Yeah, but you got to do something, Norm insisted. I analyzed it with every magical device known to Sparks, and a few that aren't. Couldn't find a seam, sigil, rivet, button, or fingerprint. Or get so much as a shiver out of it, no matter what I did. But when he touched the thing, Isabel said, it just flew out at him like magic. Probably was magic, Leopold pointed out. Norm whistled. Wish I could have seen it. And I wish you'd told me there was a secret passageway under the floor, Isabel countered, wandering over to the kitchen counter. Norm, who'd been clearing the plates, looked slowly from Isabel to Leopold, her eyebrows raised. There was a secret passageway under the floor? Leopold cleared his throat. Yeah. Norm returned from the sink, shrugging off his kiss-the-cook apron as he dropped into the chair across from him. So, he said. Larry. He prefers Leopold, Isabel said over his shoulder. Leopold considered proposing to her right then. Leopold, cool. I dig it. Norm was nodding at him. Despite his constant motion, Norm had hardly taken his eyes off Leopold since he'd regained consciousness. Now Norm leaned in, staring, intent as an X-ray. You're new here. You barely know your way around Sunderhill, right? Leopold narrowed his eyes. Right. But you knew there was a secret passageway under the floor of Goldie's. Isabel, who'd been clanking around inside the open fridge, stopped to listen. Leopold only nodded. So, Norm leaned in further, voice dropping. Who told you where to find it? There it was, the beginning of an interrogation. Leopold regarded Norm and Isabel carefully. Had these people saved him, healed him, made him an enormous breakfast, only to pry information from him? And what would they do once they had it? No one told me, he said after a beat. Norm sat back in his chair, folding his hands atop the rolling hill of his stomach. Gone was the jovial, carefree surfer. Now his eyes gleamed sharply. I find that hard to believe, little dude. Isabel kicked the fridge shut with a bang. The object had only been in that room a few days. There were obfuscation spells all over it. If we're launching an investigation, Leopold said, cutting her off, maybe first we should talk about why you've been following me. Norm's brow wrinkled. He turned to look at Isabel. You were following him? I wasn't. You were, Leopold insisted. First at the bright spot. Is it a crime to eat dinner? Then at my test. That was purely for entertainment. And then you show up at the exact room I need to search. She huffed, exasperated. You barged into my room and blew up my things in order to steal my object. Can't steal something that already belongs to me, Leopold exploded, the sudden boom of his voice bringing the conversation to a halt. Isabel stared at him, slightly stunned, but Norm looked delighted. Belongs to you, huh? Said Norm. He glanced at Isabel. That explains a lot. He could be lying, she muttered, now glaring determinedly at the wall. Norm considered that. My wild guess is he isn't. Also, he frowned suddenly, confused. Wait, you were banished, which means you must have gotten your memory revised. So why do you remember being tested and meeting Isabel and... It didn't work, obviously, Leopold said. They screwed up. Figures, Norm sighed. Trust our elected officials to do something simple. Whatever. Leopold shoved away from the table and rose to his feet. Thanks for breakfast. I think it's time for me to go. No one tried to stop him as he walked away, picking through the disarray of Norm's apartment in search of his duffel bag. Hey, where the hell is my... map? Leopold froze, then spun around. His stomach sank. Norm was holding up his mother's Thomas guide, the expression on his face just triumphant enough to piss Leopold off. He stalked back into the kitchen. You went through my things? Norm looked almost offended. Of course I went through your things. What gives you the right... You nearly blew up my niece. You stole my shit. You stole my shit. Choose a new word, guys. This is gross. Leopold tried to swipe the guide from Norm, who jerked it out of reach. Leopold briefly considered decking the guy. Norm made a show of flipping through the guide, then made an appreciative sound. This is some high-grade shit, little dude. What did I say about... Stuff, Norm corrected. This is next-level enchantment for a kid who massively, catastrophically failed his channeler test. He looked up at Leopold. I have, like, 1 billion questions for you, lunch tray Larry. Fuck, Leopold whispered, dropping his head into his hands. 1987 edition, right? Congratulations, you can read. It's right there on the cover. Norm smiled. You know what's not on the cover? The brand of the enchanter. Now Leopold looked up, frowning. What? Who cares? I care, little dude. I care a lot. Rare enchanted objects are my stock in trade. Don't diss the biz. Norm had risen across the room and was rifling through one of the cabinets. When he turned back to face them, his right eye had grown 3 times its size, and Leopold recoiled. What the hell is that? What, this? Norm gestured to his eye as he strode back to the table. When he sat down, it became obvious that he'd strapped some sort of device to his head. It looked like a cross between a monocle and a fishbowl, which, upon closer inspection, was filled with water and swam with tiny orange guppies. The guppies turned to stare at Leopold in concert. I call this an optical expositor, Norm explained. It allows me to see beneath the surface layers of magical objects. Shows me something about how they were made and sometimes by whom. Didn't reveal anything about the object on your chest, but it showed me a hell of a lot about this guide. Despite his better judgment, Leopold sank back into his seat and at the table. If Norm had information about the guide, and perhaps by extension his mum, Leopold was willing to listen. And then he'd deck the guy and get the hell out of there. Norm turned the guide over in his hands. This particular work of magical cartography was enchanted with a 1930s-era Barnack-Laker ether focus. There are maybe 3 such focuses in existence. Most in the hands of collectors. Someone with access to serious gear made this. Someone connected. Someone talented. I'd never heard of an enchantable street atlas, said Isabel, crowding behind Norm to look over his shoulder. Because they're almost as rare as 1930s-era Barnack-Lakers, said Norm. There's only one edition that's enchantable, and that's the 87. A map like this can lead you to a targeted object no matter where it is, even if it moves from place to place. The directions will adjust accordingly. And find hidden passages in the floor? Said Isabel. Yep, and if we'd kept the object in the shop... He looked up at Leopold. Your guide might have found a way to break in there too. Norm opened the guide and held it up to his eyepiece, hemming and hawing with little sounds of interest. The fish pointed this way and that, synchronizing with the movements of Norm's eye as he scanned page after page. Aha! Here you are, he said after a minute, and then he turned the guide to show Leopold what he was looking at. It was a diagram of Norm's apartment. A blue star pulsed at the center of the kitchen. There was no path anymore, and as of now, no further instructions. Norm whistled through his teeth. This really is a prima spellwork, my friend. Say it's about 5-6 years old, judging from the rate of ether decay. 5 or 6 years. Right around when his mum had died. Now, Norm turned his enormous eye and its staring fish toward Leopold, and tucked the guide under his arm. I'm going to need you to tell me where you came across this little beauty. Leopold worked his jaw as he studied the curly-haired eccentric. Norm's brown bathrobe had little pink flamingos all over it. His goatee was flecked with bits of egg. Only now did Leopold notice that Norm's pajama bottoms were decorated with marijuana leaves. His eyes, however, were clear and determined. Norm, Leopold said calmly. Are you threatening me? Yeah, little dude. Norm was smiling now. I am. Why? Because I don't trust you. Neither do I, Isabel piped in. Leopold leaned forward. I don't trust either of you. Good. We're all in agreement, said Isabel, biting into a triangle of toast. I love it when we're all in agreement. Makes it easier. Makes what easier? Leopold gasped as the object on his chest heated once more without warning. He tensed, gritting his teeth through the pain. Despite their show of toughness, both Norm and Isabel leapt out of their chairs. You okay? Isabel said, her fingers alighting on Leopold's arm. He was grateful for the point of contact, grateful for an excuse to focus all of his attention there, where she touched him. I'm fine, he said, the heat fading, pain subsiding. His hand fell away from his chest. I just got lightheaded for a second. You sure this thing isn't going to hurt him? Isabel asked. I'm sure. Norm focused his fishbowl eyepiece on Leopold again. It's got 0 death magic. It wouldn't have death magic, said Leopold, closing his eyes on an exhale. She wouldn't have done that to me. Who? Leopold looked up, surprised by his own foolishness. No one, he said. Isabel crossed her arms, frowning at Norm. Okay, maybe we should switch to good cop. Bad cop is getting us nowhere. Bad cop got us a she, countered Norm, looking affronted. Bad cop got him to admit the guy belonged to him. I'm about to crack this kid. No, you aren't, said Isabel and Leopold at the same time. Fine, Norm sighed. You're up, Is. But before she could ask him anything, the interrogation was interrupted by a familiar, insistent buzzing noise. Leopold straightened, then turned to face the living room. In the silence, it became clear that the sound was emanating from his duffel bag, which he could now see atop the cluttered coffee table. It was his phone. Hold that thought, said Leopold, rising from his chair. Bad cop wouldn't have let him leave the table to take a phone call, Norm grumbled. Chapter 52. Leopold plucked the phone from his bag, meaning only to turn it off, but the screen was lit with dozens of all-cap texts and alerts for missed calls. an enormous backlog that had for some reason only just started coming through. Most were from Richter. That his dad had tried to reach him was not surprising. Leopold had run away from home and stayed out all night. What shocked him was the sheer volume of texts and voicemails, along with missed calls from both Emmett and, strangely, Emmett's mum. "You're not planning on skipping out on us, are you?" Norm called from the kitchen. "You try to leave, bad cop will have to chase you down." Leopold almost smiled, then returned his attention to the phone. An argument of car horns drifted through the apartment's thin glass windows. He ignored Richter's voicemails. He didn't feel like being screamed at just then, and scrolled to the beginning of his dad's text instead. They started out angry, predictably enough, their timestamps beginning a few minutes after Leopold had flung Richter out of his room and ridden away on his bike. 10:57 a.m. "I had every right to do what I did. Come downstairs and face me." 11:10 a.m. "You left? Get your ass back here now." 11:11 a.m. "You're grounded for the rest of the summer." 11:21 a.m. "Make that the rest of your life if you don't answer me." 11:29 a.m. "Running away from your problems won't solve them." 11:31 a.m. "I knew you were an entitled little shit. I didn't realize I'd raised a coward." Leopold rolled his eyes. He almost swiped away from Richter's text thread, but the tone of the next message, and the next few after that, sent hours later, kept him reading. 2:46 p.m. "Answer me, Larry. Pick up your phone." 3:10 p.m. "Where the hell are you?" 3:45 p.m. "Son, this isn't funny." "Son." The messages cycled between rage and fear, threats, then finally, surprisingly, something like vulnerability. At 5:45, a flurry of missed calls and increasingly desperate texts. 5:45 p.m. "Are you crazy? You could have been killed." Someone had called him. Tiny? The police? 5:48 p.m. "I'm at the tow yard. Where are you?" Leopold was amazed. His father, normally the world's most emotionally lazy man, had actually left the house to go looking for him. 5:55 p.m. "I talked to the tow company. You're in deep shit with me, but they've agreed not to report this to the police." 6 p.m. "This is your dad. Larry, please answer. Need to know your status." Your status? Rigid, toxically proud Richter speak for "Are you okay?" He'd been operating under the assumption that his dad wouldn't really care that he was gone, that some part of Richter was glad to be rid of him. Shockingly, he'd been wrong. Then again, maybe his father's concerns stemmed partly from the fact that Leopold was under 18 and legally still his responsibility. Either way, he'd gone to the trouble of tracking him to the tow yard, asking after him, even paying off Tiny, who had surely demanded some exorbitant bribe to let the matter drop. He tried to picture self-important Richter throwing his weight around in that scruffy office with socket wrench welding Tiny and friends, but he couldn't summon the image. It was unpicturable. 7:44 p.m. "You can't just disappear like this. You're scaring me." Then, at 8:30 p.m., "The police found your car in some parking lot in the hills. I don't know if you even have your phone with you anymore, but call me. Wherever you are, I'll come get you. Please." That simple, plaintive word made Leopold's stomach knot. Please. There was one final text at 10:55 p.m. "It's been 12 hours. Free-floating, desperate, emotionally inscrutable. Was he angry or terrified? Or both?" And that was it. End of thread. Leopold's first reaction was resentment. He tried to remember the last time his dad had said a caring word to him, anything that carried even the subtlest whiff of "I give a shit." But now that Leopold was maybe hurt, maybe in danger, now he could bring himself to thumb-type the word please. Way too little and way too late. He let the phone and the hand holding it fall to his side. Somehow he'd arrived at the window, and through the sheer curtain he could see a Spanish-style courtyard, jungly with potted palms, a small kidney-shaped pool at the center. A dark shape swam lazy circles beneath the surface, in no apparent hurry to come up for air. He decided to believe Richter cared, or evinced caring, because Leopold's disappearance could make trouble for him in the form of police inquiries and hospital stays and, if worse came to worse, funeral plans. And he was an important man with a reputation to manage. Leopold could untangle the rest later. The siren wailed outside. Leopold tensed as it sped up, then had the realization that sent his heart racing. He was a wanted man in both Sunder and Slack LA. To be safe, he knew he should turn his phone off altogether, but he wanted to look through the notifications from Emmett and Emmett's mum first. They'd come through earlier that morning, not the previous night, which meant Richter had probably recruited them in his quest to find Leopold. He considered calling Emmett's mum just so she wouldn't worry, but he'd seen enough police procedural shows to know he couldn't reach out without running the risk of giving away his location. If the police were looking for him, they might be able to trace his call. And what would he do if the cops suddenly descended on the El Royale apartments? Where would he go then? Hey, is everything okay? Isabel had ventured out of the kitchen. She stood beside a boxy TV propped on a cocktail cart, frowning at him. Leopold shifted to look at her, struck again by her beauty. She was outlined in sun, dust motes suspended in a slash of golden light that cut across her green eyes, which were wide with something like concern, but he didn't trust it. Everything's fine, he said, turning away. He felt her approach, the weight of her presence tangible as she drew near. Norm was puttering in the kitchen, pretending not to listen. The two of them stood side by side, staring silently out the window. A murder of crows circled a nearby telephone pole. You're in trouble, aren't you? She said quietly. He shook his head, feeling suddenly restless. He glanced at the phone still clutched in his hand. I thought Slack Tech didn't work in Sunder. Phones never work in Sunder Hill, she explained. They occasionally work in other Sunder hoods because their veils and boundaries are more porous. Right. He took a breath. Well, I need to go. Where? Leopold closed his eyes. He wanted to laugh. Nowhere. He didn't even have Bessie anymore. He tried to imagine calling his dad, then crawling back home, back into the revolting skin of Larry Berry and the suffocating limits of that world. The iron fist of Richter that had reined him in. The fantasies that had always ruled him. He couldn't return to that. He wouldn't. An escape from Norm's apartment would achieve nothing. Running from this wouldn't save or spare him, wouldn't remove this thing from his chest, wouldn't reveal a path forward. Clearly, his mum wasn't finished with him yet. For a moment, there was a lull in the clamour outside, horns and the screech of garbage truck fading to a hush, as if some cosmic sound mixer had dipped the city's master volume to zero, as if Los Angeles itself was holding its breath. Leopold. Isabel tried again. Do you think... Leopold, who'd been fidgeting with his phone in his hand, suddenly dropped it. Isabel moved quickly to catch it, and in the process, one of her sleeves slid part way up her forearm, revealing a tracery of knotted pink lines. The scars twisted around her slender wrist until they disappeared beneath the fabric of her cloak. She straightened slowly, the alarm in her eyes belaying her outward calm. She handed him his phone without a word, then tugged down her sleeve. What happened? He asked, nodding under her arm as he pocketed the phone. What's going on with you? She deflected. Leopold exhaled, returning his eyes to the window. He had no one to count on, no one to trust. Nothing, really, to lose. My dad thinks I might be lying in a ditch somewhere, he said softly, and now he's got the police looking for me. She was quiet a moment. I'm guessing that means he doesn't know about Sunder. Leopold shook his head. What about your mum? Isabel asked. Does she know? My mum is dead. He said it like he always did, bluntly, as if the words meant nothing, cost him nothing to say aloud, required nothing of the hearer. He waited for Isabel to look away, the way most people did. Most people were intimidated by death, freaked out by the intensity of mum loss and semi-orphanhood. But Isabel didn't flinch. When? She asked. He turned and met her eyes. She didn't look afraid or devastated. In fact, she was smiling a little. When I was 12. Hey, mine too, she said, her smile growing. Against his every instinct, Leopold found himself unclenching. What do you mean? Both my parents died when I was 12. Both of them, damn. Leopold shook his head. At the same time? She looked away, nodding at the window. In a fire. Lab accident. That's why you live with Norm. Again, she nodded. Leopold was still, studying her as she watched the distant hills. I'm sorry, he said finally. The death of one parent had nearly broken him forever, and despite having a father who was essentially a stranger, he couldn't imagine losing both. That's a shitty way to lose your parents. She laughed a little when she said, It really is. Efficient, though. Their eyes met fleetingly then, long enough for some fragile, unsayable thing to pass between them. a bright spark of shared understanding, of agonies so large they refused expression, of pain untranslatable to language. Then a truck blasted its horn outside, and Los Angeles resumed. The phone in Leopold's pocket buzzed, and Isabel's smile returned. So popular this morning. The incoming call was from Emmett's mum, and it was her third of the day. Leopold's finger hovered over the button. He wasn't sure whether to answer. He wanted to answer. If Dr. Laura Worthington was calling him this much, something was definitely wrong. But he worried again that the police might trace his location. The ringing stopped. Now came the double buzz of a voicemail. Leopold felt Isabel's eyes on him as he stepped away to listen. Hearing Emmett's mum speak always made Leopold feel like he was a kid having a sleepover in Emmett's basement. Dr. W would pop down around midnight, instruct them sternly to go to sleep, and leave a tray of snacks behind. Her voice had that same firm go-to-bed timbre now, but she sounded frayed and anxious too. Hi, Larry. It's Dr. Worthington again. I need you to call me back right away. Something's wrong with Emmett. He hasn't been himself since yesterday, the morning after you two were out so late. He's been really spacey, and he's saying things that don't make sense. I just need to know what you did, where you went. Is it possible Emmett hit his head somehow? Did you take something? I'm beyond anger at this point, Larry. I just need to know how to help him. Call me. We're worried. Thanks. Leopold was reeling. Something's wrong with Emmett. It wasn't like Emmett's parents to call him like this. They trusted their son and almost never freaked out, so whatever was going on had to be serious. But Leopold had talked to Emmett on the phone only yesterday, and he sounded like himself. A little out of it, maybe, but that was to be expected from someone who just had his memory revised. He played Emmett's last voicemail, time-stamped 67 minutes ago. Mr. Berry, it's Mr. Worthington. Again. Are we shooting today, or what? You're not answering, so I'm going to assume you're on your way to the location. Shooting today? A sick feeling gripped Leopold. You better be, because I spent half the night packing fake blood into these new scribs I got. They're real ones from an actual movie set and completely illegal to use without a permit, which means they're going to be friggin' awesome. It was supposed to be a surprise, but whatever. I can't find the extra paladin costumes anywhere, though, so I hope, He mumbled something unintelligible, and there was a dull crash in the background like he'd knocked something over. What the hell? Who rearranged my room? Where are my nunchucks? Anyway, I hope you called Tom and Erica, because I don't have their numbers on my phone for some reason, and I don't want to recruit any more randos to be extras. And remember, we're shooting at Hollywood Forever this time, not Pan Pacific Park. I'm leaving in 5. See you soon. After another dull crash and a muttered curse, the voicemail ended. Leopold listened to the message one more time to make sure he'd heard it correctly, then played Emmett's other 2 messages. The first was about collaborating on homework for a class they'd had together, freshman year of high school. The second was somehow even more worrying, and consisted mostly of Emmett laughing strangely, trying and failing to remember why he'd called, then finally whispering, Larry, what's happening? Before hanging up. Leopold stood gripping the silent phone, horrified. Emmett thought they were still in Mr. Bostick's intro to chemistry class. He thought they were still making Sunderworld videos. Holy shit. Emmett thought they were 14. Leopold jammed his phone into his pocket and turned to find his boots. Chapter 53. What's wrong? Isabel's fear was palpable, her rigid frame an exclamation point as she followed Leopold toward the couch. Something's wrong, Uncle Norm, she called out. Something's wrong with Leopold. Norm came shuffling over in his bathrobe, half a chocolate chip cookie melting in one hand. What's going on? Hey now, he growled. What did I say about skipping out on us? Leopold was hopping around, his foot stuffed into one boot while he scoured the floor for its mate. I have to go. Emmett needs me. They messed up his brain. Who's Emmett? Norm asked. Is that the guy who was with you at the Bright Spot? Leopold nodded. Where the hell is my other boot? Here, it's wedged under... He and Isabel both bent to retrieve it and clonked their shoulders together. Leopold attempted to put the boot on while standing, lost his balance, and did a controlled fall onto the couch. Wait a second, slow down. She dropped onto the cushion beside him. What do you mean they messed up his brain? Leopold laced as he spoke. Emmett's memory is all screwed up. His parents are flipping out. He spared her a brief, worried glance. He thinks we're 14 and still making Sunderworld videos. He's headed to the Hollywood Forever Cemetery right now to meet me for a shoot. Sunderworld videos? Norm brightened. You know about Sunderworld? I haven't heard anyone mention Sunderworld in years. Uncle Norm, said Isabel, frowning. Right, he said, popping the rest of his cookie in his mouth. He spoke while he chewed. Bad time. Leopold finished lacing his boots, stood up, and looked Norm in the eye. He'd ask Sunderworld follow-up questions later. If I bring Emmett back here, can you fix him? Whoa, I don't know about that, little dude. Norm took a step back. Depends on the memory enchantment they used. They're revisionist. Rewiring the brain is serious magic. Plus, you need a license for that kind of work. If I go digging around in his head, I might mess things up even more. What about Jamal? Isabel suggested. The hypnotist? Norm wiped a chocolatey hand on his robe, considering. It's a good thought, Is. A real good thought. I'd say it's a definite maybe. Leopold crossed to the window in a few long strides. I'll take a maybe, he said, his mind reeling. Emmett was out there somewhere, thinking he was 14, and it was all Leopold's fault. He twitched the curtain, checking for cops. The courtyard was empty. He glanced back at Norm and Isabel. Try to be back in a couple of hours. No way, Norm was shaking his head, his salt and pepper curls bouncing. Can't just let you go running around lunch tray. If it weren't for the 7 protective enchantments I put on this place, Sunder PD would have come to arrest you an hour ago. You'd be getting Clockwork Orange at the department HQ right now. You're hiding a vice while some flunky puts Veritas drops in your eyes. You think they messed up your friend? Just wait till they get a hold of you. He nodded at Leopold's chest. Now that you've got something that interests them. Leopold stilled. Something that interests them? You mean this object might have something to do with the Sunder government? Were you not listening when I said heavy individuals? Said Norm, flinging out an arm that almost knocked an old camera off a shelf. Who do you think I meant? There are only 3 kinds of people who could source enough ether to create something that powerful. He counted on his ringed fingers. Shady, Shady, and a channeler. A flicker of emotion went through Leopold at the word channeler. He snuffed it out. Isabel stood up from the couch, her studied cool eroding, and positioned herself between Leopold and the door. We're in this together now, she said, watching him. Don't do anything stupid. Please. Together? Leopold echoed. I don't even know you two. Norm crossed his arms. The object may have attached itself to you, my dude, but it appeared on our doorstep. Mine and Isabel's. We're just as much a part of this as you are. Oh yeah? What happened to good cop, bad cop? We'll finish the interrogation later, Isabel said. I promise I'll be really annoying. And I'll order pizza, said Norm, who was somehow biting into another cookie. I got a coupon for deep dish. You know I hate deep dish, said Isabel, making a face. I want to try that new place, the one in Ivor. Guys? Norm and Isabel turned to look at him. I'm leaving. Again, Isabel blocked the door. If you leave, you might not make it back. There are 2 different police departments out there looking for you now, and thanks to the explosion you set off at Goldie's, you're a higher priority for the Sunder PD than you were just, a guy whose worst day ever was caught on camera. She inched closer. The power of her full attention was hypnotic. She tapped the metal ring on his chest, and he could have sworn he felt the small touch reverberate through his ribcage. Mysterious power devices of unknown origin don't just show up on doorsteps and bind themselves to barely magical people. The executive called me remarkably unremarkable, Leopold said dryly. Average, absolutely, to the decimal point. Unspecial by every magical merit. If we're going to insult my abilities, let's quote an expert. Isabel laughed. Leopold cracked a smile. I'm serious, she said finally, softly. This could mean something. Listen, I want to figure out what's going on as much as you do, he replied, eyes returning to the door. But first I have to help my friend. Emmett's a danger to himself, and I can't trust that he'll make it all the way here on his own, even if I give him turn-by-turn directions. Fine, said Isabel with a sigh. If you're dead set on this, I won't stop you, but I'm coming too. Isabel, Norm cried. No way you're going anywhere after what just happened to you last night. You still need to rest. And I don't need a babysitter, Leopold added. No, said Norm, turning on him. She's right, you can't go alone. You need someone who knows their ass from a portable hole in the ground. I'm coming with you. You can't, said Isabel. You've got that thing today, remember? Norm wavered, then raked a hand through his curls. Shit. What thing? Asked Leopold. I gotta meet with my old parole officer, Norm muttered. In fucking Redondo Beach. I hate Redondo Beach. Leopold's eyes widened, but Norm waved it off. I did a stint in Sultan State a few years back for possession of unauthorized magical devices. He added air quotes and a scowl. Bureaucratic overreach at its finest. Long story short, I owe my parole officer a huge favor, and he happened to pick today to call it in. Don't worry, Isabel said. My uncle's not a criminal. None unless absolutely necessary, Norm added with a wink. Right. So, Isabel fixed her eyes on Leopold. We got a deal? No. Isabel frowned. You won't last 10 minutes without me. Listen, Leopold said, his impatience rising. I might be lunch today, Larry, but I killed a Noxon with a tray, okay? I'm gonna be fine. Norm's rich laughter filled the room. He clapped Leopold on the shoulder and gave him a little shake. I think I like this guy. Yeah, said Isabel, still smiling. I think I do too. Chapter 54. In the end, Isabel got her way. She and Norm had conferenced in the kitchen, exchanging heated whispers before she emerged looking pleased with herself, after which a sullen Norm had barked at Leopold to follow him into his bedroom. You gotta change your clothes, lunch tray. Both sets of cops will have a description of... He'd taken in Leopold's burned and bloodied outfit. That. Alone now, Leopold studied himself in the mirror of Norm's surprisingly neat bedroom, frowning at his bare chest. He often frowned at himself in mirrors. This time, the focus of his displeasure wasn't his unruly hair or moderately developed pectorals, but the thing centered between them, encircled by shreds of the bloody shirt he'd been forced to scissor away. Interestingly, he no longer felt a barely containable urge to tear the thing off his body. How are things fitting? Norm called from behind the door. Fine, Leopold called back. Be right out. He turned to the clothes Norm had left on his paisley-sheeted waterbed. A pair of baggy beige drawstring pants, a washed-out shirt that read Lollapalooza 94, a burnt orange fraying at the elbows track jacket. Though Leopold appreciated the gesture from a veritable stranger, he pushed aside Norm's pile of weed-scented garments in favor of a few wrinkled basics from his duffel bag. Already he'd spent several minutes cleaning himself up in the bathroom, grateful he'd remembered to pack a razor and some deodorant, but he would have killed for a hot shower had there been time. He pulled on a grey Henley and a pair of black jeans, then finger-combed his reddish-brown hair. The one thing he'd lost in the madness of yesterday was his crappy Dodgers cap, and with a sigh of resignation, he searched through Norm's offerings for a suitable replacement. The only real option was a beanie. It was pink, with a smiling cartoon cat embroidered on it. The cat, naturally, was giving everyone the middle finger. Norm and Isabel were in consultation in the living room when Leopold emerged. They were sorting through a range of what looked like homebrewed magical devices on a console table. Norm muttered as he pointed to a pair of tea-brown dice, and Isabel said something affirmative in reply as she skimmed them off the table and dropped them into a pocket of her cloak. I'm ready, Leopold said. Looking up, they broke into wide smiles. You wore the beanie! Norm laughed, flashing a double-barreled thumbs up. I got the matching slippers too, man, if you want to borrow them. I'm good, thanks. I never pictured you as a stoner, said Isabel. You look like you might try to sell us a dime bag outside a bowling alley. I was going for someone who wasn't blown up recently, Leopold said, high-stepping an overflowing laundry basket on his way across the room. Isabel, on the other hand, hadn't changed much. Do you wear that every day? Leopold said, meaning the cloak. Only when there's a chance I might need to defend myself, she said, shrugging, which is most days. She selected a slim, serrated knife from the tabletop and slid it into a sheath on her belt. Holstered beside it were what appeared to be a loop rope, an old TV remote, and a small can of spray paint, among other less identifiable objects. A ready for almost anything kit, my own design. Norm waved a hand at the items like a game show host. Noxon repellent, a chance scrambler for low-level curse deflection, and a befogger for quick escapes, plus a few other goodies. He winked at Isabel. Just in case. Just in case. Leopold couldn't help but think of his mother. Absently, he lifted a hand to the focuser, the outline of which he could feel through his shirt. He wouldn't let her down. Leopold had started to follow Isabel to the door when Norm caught his elbow, pulling him aside. Need to bend your ear about something, he said, his expression suddenly grave. It's about Izzy. Oh, said Leopold, looking ruefully at the door. But Emmett... My niece is strong, confident, and smart as hell. It's easy to get fooled into thinking she's as bulletproof as she pretends to be. But she isn't. said Norm, low and serious. In fact, she's not well. Leopold hesitated, remembering the web of scars he'd seen trailing up her forearm. She's sick? Not exactly. Norm glanced at the entryway where Isabel knelt partly out of view, lacing up her boots. She has this sort of situation. She wouldn't want me getting into all this with you, but it's important that you know. Casting can be very dangerous for her. But she carries around that focuser. She cast us halfway across the city with a port spell last night. She got lucky. She could have been seriously hurt. Norm shook his head. Look, I forced her to give up her focuser today, but even a cheap precast could cause an injury. That's why I make devices for her and load them with high-potency ether. It's of a purity you can't find anymore. Powerful enough to allow Isabel to use a bit of magic to protect herself, but without really casting. Unsure how to respond, Leopold just nodded. Norm leaned in, his voice dropping to a whisper. The true bastard of it is she's really goddamn good. Naturally, she gets frustrated, tries to outsmart her condition. It never works. She put herself in the hospital more times than I care to remember. The hospital? Leopold echoed. Norm's eyes narrowed on him. Do not let her cast. Okay, yeah, sure, Leopold said, frowning. I won't, I promise. Norm's face relaxed just as Isabel stood up and turned to face them. Everyone remember to use the bathroom? He said cheerily. Chapter 55. Holy hell, this place is gorgeous, Leopold said under his breath, craning his neck as he and Isabel walked through the grand lobby. The El Royale was an old Hollywood beauty, past its prime perhaps, but a beauty nonetheless, with a dozen heavy iron chandeliers suspended from its soaring wood-beam ceiling, hand-painted Spanish tile in abundance, and an ornate splashing fountain in the center of the floor. Sparks of all types buzzed around, picking up packages at the doorman's desk, and chatting by a wall of mailboxes that stretched high out of reach. Puzzles of prismatic light fell across the floor through stained glass windows, each depicting some scene from Sunday history. Had Emmett been there, he would have forced them to stop so he could analyze every detail, cross-referencing them against his voluminous knowledge of LA history. Of course, if Emmett had been there, they wouldn't have been in such a hurry. Leopold quickened his pace, the dread in his gut growing heavier with each step. The beauty's a trick, Isabel whispered as they rounded the fountain. The El Royale was built on top of an old Noxum containment pit, way down in one of the sub-basements. The building was meant to be a sort of cap. If it wasn't so fancy, nobody would have wanted to live here. She hesitated, glancing at him. Leopold's mind was elsewhere. You still got those sunglasses from yesterday, right? Leopold put them on and pulled his beanie low. They exited through wrought iron doors. Leopold felt a light pressure tug at his limbs, as if he'd walked into a giant spider web. He pushed forward, was released with barely an audible pop, and stumbled outside feeling lightheaded, like he'd experienced a sudden and dramatic change in altitude. That's the veil, Isabel explained. It's an enchantment we use to protect the building from overly curious slacks. Their eyes slide right past it. Cool, he enthused, looking back at the invisible barrier. The exit led not onto busy Cahuenga Boulevard, but into a narrow alley, all the better to hide the comings and goings of the building's sundries tenants. Bunting of colourful laundry swayed overhead, drying on lines stretched between the El Royale's beautiful facade and that of its unremarkable, and almost certainly unmagical, neighbour. In this part of town, spark and slack seemed to be shuffled together, cheek by jowl. Leopold's phone buzzed. It was a text from Emmett. Where you at? Pretty chill here. Just dead people around. Emmett, unnaturally punctual for a teenager, was already at Hollywood Forever, a touristy cemetery packed with dead celebrities. Leopold's chest tightened at the thought of his adult friend spending the next 20 or 30 minutes there by himself. Emmett was so chatty, he'd probably end up making friends with the grave tender and whatever funeral mourners happened to by. Who knew what trouble he might get into? Emmett's already at the cemetery, Leopold said. We need to hurry. He composed a quick reply as they sped to the end of the alley. Be there soon. Meet by Johnny Ramone. Don't talk to anybody. Emmett replied right away with, okay, why? And Leopold typed, just don't. And Emmett sent an animated gif of a dancing bear that made no contextual sense and only deepened Leopold's worry. The sky sprawled open at Cahuenga smog like a bathtub ring smearing the horizon. Tar-stained palms lined both sides of the wide avenue, a parade of shabby cheerleaders shaking their pom-poms for 5 lanes of indifferent traffic. Isabel pointed south. We'll take Cahuenga to Santa Monica, to Hollywood forever. Sunday public transport doesn't reach the cemetery, so walking will be fastest. We just need to make a pit stop first. It'll only take a minute. What? No. Yes. Why? Because I need to get something. Something that saves me more times than I can count. She looked at him with a gleam in her eyes. Snacks. I'm not hungry, he said flatly. Isabel grabbed his hand and pulled him off the sidewalk. These aren't regular snacks, she said. Just trust me. He supposed he did trust her to some extent because he allowed her to drag him across the street at a dead sprint, Isabel's cloak flying out behind her as they dodged knots of cars and speeding city bus. Even after they'd made it to the other side, she hardly slowed, guiding him around a tangle of tipped shopping carts and into a parking lot of a grungy strip mall. It looked like every other grungy strip mall in town, save one detail: the sagging inflatable wizard on its roof. A memory sparked, sudden and vivid, of a man pulling a tooth from his own mouth, then using it to feed a parking meter that opened a glowing cavity in the pavement. Leopold had seen it happen not 3 weeks ago, right here, through the window of his idling Volvo. An eerie feeling crept over him, like he was treading in his own ghostly footsteps. He and Isabel went into a convenience store called Jay's Cash and Dash, squashed between a strip mall psychic and a tire shop. As an automatic door hissed open to admit them, Leopold felt a minor tug, like a half-strength version of what he'd felt leaving El Royale. This place, too, was veiled. The Cash and Dash was deserted except for a hipsterish Asian guy manning the register. The items on offer appeared to be standard: beer, wiper fluid, air freshener. Until Leopold spotted a sign above aisle 7 which read, Occult Miscellaneous. Beneath those words in faint palimpsest, Leopold could make out the sign as it must have appeared to Slacks. Pet food. Expired. Compared to the rest of the store, aisle 7 was in a sad state. Its shelves picked over like miniature 99 spells that was about to go out of business. A disorganized rack of precasts in plastic packages. Dusty tabloids shuffled with what looked like spell books. A few focuser accessories with no actual focuses. Wasting no time, Isabel headed straight for the snacks, grabbing a bright orange bag of flaming hot magic crisps, and something that looked almost exactly like raisinets, but instead they were called abracadabs. What do these do? Leopold asked, trailing her to a lighted drink fridge. Isabel chose a neon green energy drink and pushed the frosty can into his hand. They gave you ether levels a quick boost. It's all junk food, so the effect doesn't last long, but it's better than nothing. Even using my uncle's devices can dig a hole in your levels that could leave you weak if you've barely done magic before. Best to be prepared. Remembering the awful, hollowed-out feeling that had come over him during his channeler test, Leopold nodded and looked down at the can of Ether Blast Extreme he was holding. Chug it and meet me up front, she said, already heading for the register. Leopold popped the top and made a sound like a .22 rifle shot and sprayed purple sparks up his nose. He fought back a sneeze, then took a cautious sip. After an involuntary full-body shudder, a strange and pleasant sensation of simultaneous heat and cold coursed through him. He decided it wasn't half bad. Leopold's phone buzzed. Another text from Emmett. Update. Bored. Hungry. Think I'll hit Astroburger. Text me your order. Don't leave. Almost there, Leopold texted back. A lie. I'm bringing food. The food part wasn't a lie, though he wasn't sure what would happen if a non-magical person consumed ether-laced snacks, and this wasn't the day to find out. In response, 3 dancing dots appeared on his phone screen, then disappeared. Leopold's anxiety spiked. Chapter 56. As he approached the register, Leopold interrupted a surreptitious exchange between Isabel and the clerk. The clerk, who wore oversized glasses and had his hair slicked back in a pompadour, had just passed Isabel a small package wrapped in white butcher paper. Leopold would have assumed it was a sandwich, except the Cash and Dash didn't have a deli counter. He decided to let Isabel have his secret, whatever it was. Leopold, this is Jay, Isabel said quickly, stuffing the package into her cloak. He and Uncle Norm went to college together. Nice hat, Jay said with a smirk. He turned to Isabel. Doesn't Norm have the same one? Yeah, he's got the slippers too. Nice to meet you, Jay, Leopold said, holding up the half-finished ether blast. Hope it's okay that I already opened this. No problem, Jay said, and started bagging the other stuff. Oh man, abracadabs. These are addictive. Have you tried the green tea flavor yet? I want to, but you're always out of stock. They don't always make it onto the shelves, Jay said with a wink. Next time I get a shipment, I'll hang on to some for you. Leopold tugged Isabel aside. Hey, Emmett's getting restless. I'm worried he's going to wander off unless we get there soon. So unless you've got a flying car parked somewhere around here, we need to call an Uber. She frowned. Flying cars are illegal. What's an Uber? You've seriously never heard of Uber? It's a ride-hailing app. She cut him off. No apps. We don't do apps. We? The register dinged. Sparks don't, Jay said, pushing their bag across the counter. Slack Tech doesn't play well with ether-based magic. Brings out the ghost in the machine. I put this stuff on your tab, by the way. Isabel nodded gratefully. Thanks, Jay. And hey, if anyone asks, you never saw us, okay? You got it, Jay said. They were about to go when they heard the loud, distinctive squelch of a radio from the walkway outside. They all turned toward the sound. The squelch came again, followed by a voice saying, 10-4 base. They were seen entering a convenience store in Cahuenga. Approaching now. Leopold tensed. Isabel's expression darkened. She asked Jay if there was another way out of his stall. Afraid not, he said. But if you hurry, I've got a stockroom. He jutted his thumb at an open doorway behind him, a curtain partially screening a cramped space stacked with boxes. The automatic door whooshed open. Leopold ducked behind the counter just as the cop entered, but Isabel didn't make it in time. Isabel Alvarez? It was a weary, I should be on my lunch break voice. Yes? Isabel answered. The cop asked Isabel if she'd seen a tall kid in a grey shirt, black jeans, and hiking boots. She said she hadn't. Leopold scrunched a little lower, feeling like a jackass for hiding while Isabel had to endure an interrogation. Then maybe you can explain why someone called our tip line a few minutes ago, the cop said. About a person matching your description running across Cahuenga with a person matching his description. Leopold took stock of Jay, whose casual slouch beside the register betrayed no fear. Oh, him, Isabel said innocently enough. He came up to me on the street asking for directions. Said he was looking for a bus stop. I knew where it was and didn't see any harm in walking him there. You know the one on Selma? A scratching sound. The cop was writing something down. Uh-huh. He didn't seem suspicious or anything. He walked with me for like a block, but then something scared him and he ran off. I think he saw a police car. You should know there's a warrant out for his arrest. He's not only here illegally, but wanted in connection with an incident that occurred last night in Sunderhill. Isabel, cool up to now, sounded nervous. Well, that's everything I know. Leopold glanced at the stockroom. Its half-curtained entrance only a short crawl away. Then he risked a quick peek around the counter. Instead of a uniform, the cop wore a wrinkled leather jacket and a tie. A serious-looking pistol-grip focuser hung from his belt. Isabel stood with her cloak partly open, its array of magical devices just within Leopold's reach. He began to form something like a plan. Leopold raised the unfinished can of ether blast to his lips. He'd never set it down, and silently chugged the rest of it. The cop was questioning Jay now. You see anyone matching that description? I didn't, Rick. Detective Samuels. Can't call me Rick while I'm on duty. No such kid came in here, as far as I know, Detective Samuels. The detective's radio squawked. Face Samuels, we got a second positive ID on the girl and the kid. They were seen entering the cash and dash. Leopold's pulse began to race, but he didn't know whether the increasing dire situation of the ether blast was responsible for the effect. Base, I'm on location at the cash and dash. About to do a sweep, requesting backup. 10-4 Samuels, dispatching now. Both of you stay where you are. Samuels' tone had gone from bored to pissed. I'm going to execute a search of the premises. Samuels muttered an incantation and something hummed to life. A reddish beam swept across the ceiling. Whatever he was using, Leopold assumed it was capable of discovering a barely magical boy crouching behind a counter. I'll help you search, Jay offered. There's a bathroom and a broom closet past aisle 7, and you'll need my keys to get into them. All right, but the girl stays here. Hands on the counter where I can see them. No funny business, no casting. Leopold scanned Isabel's holstered devices. He then reached out, wrapped his fingers around the hilt of her slim, serrated knife, and drew it carefully from its sheath. This, he knew from Sunderworld, was a limi knife, a tool capable of cutting through solid walls. Isabel tried to bump his hand away with her elbow, but she couldn't take her hands off the counter. Can I at least call my uncle? She said. No, Samuels barked. His red beam swept the ceiling. Leopold started crawling toward the stockroom, the knife gripped in his right hand. Isabel attempted to hook him with her foot, but he pulled free. Passing the stockroom's curtained doorway, he glanced back. Isabel stood marooned at the register while the two men walked off down the main aisle. If Samuels turned around at the wrong time, he'd have a direct line of sight. so Leopold would have to work fast. And while he was sure cutting a hole through the wall was the best way to save them, he was less certain that the technique he'd seen on the episode of Sunderworld years ago was technically correct, or that, even if it was, he could pull it off. There was only one way to find out. Leopold crawled to a gap between the shelves, knelt before the exposed cinder blocks, and pressed the tip of Isabel's knife to the wall. Nothing happened. He applied more pressure. Just as Leopold was imagining what the inside of a Sunder jail cell might look like, the handle of the knife began to heat in his hands. The ether he'd consumed seemed to come alive inside him, a powerful, slightly intoxicating sensation that sizzled in his veins. Then, as if the wall were made of softening butter rather than concrete, the blade sank into the hilt. Now, down. That's what he'd seen Max do. In the show, it had been easy as cutting cake. But as Leopold gripped the knife and tried to drag it toward the floor, he realized the show had not been entirely accurate on this point. A few seconds later, he'd managed to bring the knife down only a few inches. It took nearly a minute of sustained effort to reach the floor, his hands shaking as a slim gap finally opened in the blade's wake. Daylight glowed through gauzy, dew-dappled webbing, and from the other side he could hear a city noise. He stopped, unsure what to do next. At this point in episode 5, The Unsubtle Knife, Max had made a gap large enough to escape through. Leopold was hardly wide enough to accommodate one leg. Getting desperate, he turned to look at Isabel. She stood at the register with her back to him. The detective's balding head bobbed down the occult sundries aisle behind Jay, his searchlight scanning windows and walls. Soon they'd be returning. Leopold pulled the knife from the wall, and its blade faded red-hot to cool silver. He didn't know what to do. "Give me my damn knife back!" Leopold spun around so fast he nearly toppled a tower of boxes. Isabel was right behind him. But she was also, he confirmed with a baffled glance, still at the register, which was impossible. His eyes darted between the two Isabels. "How?" "Doppelbuddy," she whispered. The Isabel at the register turned to honor its marker with a grin, and Leopold recoiled. One of its eyes drooped alarmingly below the other. Its nose took a sharp left where Isabel's was small and slightly upturned, and its lips were pulled into a snaggletooth grimace. It looked just like Isabel if her face had been put through a laundry press. "I know it's not great," actual Isabel said, "but I had, 20 seconds to make it because you were over here about to rip a hole into the ninth realm, in which case we would have had much worse things to deal with than one surly cop." "What do you mean, the ninth realm?" "Never mind." She snatched the knife from his hand. "Just keep watch while I fix this." Wielding the blade's tip like a pen, she set about making adjustments to Leopold's work with quick, confident strokes of a calligrapher. Back at the register, Doppel Isabel swayed on its feet, a video game character whose player had abandoned their controller. With a sudden shudder, the gap in the wall began to expand. After a few seconds, Isabel tapped the blade against the concrete and the expansion halted. It was just wide enough for them to squeeze through one at a time. "Damn," Leopold said, awestruck. "You're good." "My sigil work is okay," she admitted, clearing diaphanous, cottony webbing from the gap with the flat of the knife. The webbing fell to the floor where it immediately disintegrated to ash. "My spell work is better." The red beam was tracking toward them across the ceiling. Isabel urged Leopold toward the opening. "You first," he said in flat refusal. She almost laughed as she wedged into the gap. "And I thought chivalry was dead." As she wriggled through the other side, Leopold saw Doppel Isabel wander away from the counter and into the aisles. They were officially out of time. Hastily, he followed Isabel through the wall. Chapter 57. Leopold emerged into a shaded breezeway that separated the cash and ass from the psychic next door. He'd hoped to be able to reach the rear of the strip mall and escape unseen down an alley. But from here, the only way out was straight through the parking lot to Cahuenga. Back inside the store, they could hear Samuel's yelling at the Doppelbuddy. In a minute, he'd see its face up close and realized he'd been tricked. "I've got to close the wall," Isabel said, flipping a small switch embedded in the knife's hilt. "If they realized I use a limit knife, Uncle Norm will be in deep shit." She began to draw the gap closed, making rapid, stitch-like gestures across the opening. "These things aren't technically legal." She'd only been working a few seconds when they heard the pitched wail of an approaching siren. The backup Samuels had requested was about to arrive. Isabel finished her work and returned the limit knife to its sheath. Leopold leaned around the corner of the breezeway to make sure the coast was clear, and together they ran into the parking lot, ducking behind a pickup truck as a police cruiser skidded to a halt in front of the cash and dash. 2 officers in blue got out. Leopold recognized them as Sunder PD not by their blue uniforms, which were nearly identical to those worn by the LAPD, but by their complex holsters and circular badges. One hurried into the convenience store while the other stood guard, watching the lot. Now there was no way out. "Any chance we can make a run for it?" Leopold asked. A flapping sound snapped their attention to the sky. A pair of enormous crows were circling high above. Isabel shook her head. "Those aren't normal birds," she said darkly. "They're watchers. Spies enchanted by the department. They're covering the exit in case we make it to the street." Leopold swore under his breath, then cast a hopeful glance at her cloak. "In that case, I don't suppose you brought a portable hole?" "No," she said. "You?" "Fresh out," he joked. Then something occurred to him, and he said, "When someone puts a tooth in a parking meter and a hole opens in the ground, what's down there?" "Utility tunnels, stuff like that." Her eyes narrowed. "Why?" "A few weeks ago, I saw someone put a tooth in one of those." He nodded to a row of meters on the far side of the lot. "You wouldn't happen to have any loose teeth, would you?" Isabel stared at him with ill-concealed astonishment. "Yeah," she said. "Uncle Norm always makes me carry some just in case." She dipped a hand into one of her pockets and drew out a molar, ambered with age. "But, look, those kinds of entrances aren't usually veiled. We'll have no cover at all." "You've got no other choice." Leopold plucked the tooth from her hand. "Stay low and come with me." Her mouth set in a grim line. Isabel hesitated only a moment before she said quietly, "Lead the way, lunch tray." They darted from parked car to parked car until they reached the row of meters, then crouched behind an old newspaper box. The only thing sheltering them from direct view of a cop. The newspaper dispenser read Los Angeles Times, but also, in a veiled underlayer, Sunder Prism. Leopold took the opportunity to look around. There were at least 20 parking meters, and he wasn't immediately certain which was the right one. Closing his eyes, Leopold cast his memory back to his view out Bessie's window, to the man with the tooth, and the shop he'd been closest to. "The birds are circling," Isabel whispered. "The cops will be able to pinpoint our location any minute now." Suddenly, he had it. His eyes flew open. That meter, in front of the vacuum repair shop. It looked like all the other meters but for one detail, which resolved into perfect clarity only as Leopold focused on it. Below a slot that accepted coins was a second opening, square-shaped and blue. "There," he said, pointing. "It's that one." Isabel nodded, her jaw tight. Leopold's blood pumped in his ears as they ran the short distance. Wasting no time, he pushed the molar into the square slot. Immediately, the meter emitted a low hum and the asphalt in front of it began to shimmer, then ripple. There came a cry of alarm from behind them. They spun around to see a stupefied woman shouting incoherently, dropped shopping bags at her feet, waving her arm at the rift now splitting the pavement. Pedestrians stopped and stared, stirred by the commotion. Sirens blared nearby, and the crows overhead clamored for attention as 2, then 3 Sunder cops came running. Leopold urged Isabel forward. The hole had widened enough to expose a ladder, its lower rungs vanishing into darkness. Isabel paused to stuff something that resembled chewing gum into the tooth slot, which quickly expanded to cocoon the entire meter. She'd only placed a foot on the first rung when the crack of a focuser rang out. They ducked for cover as a bolt of blue shot overhead, leaving a scorch trail in the air and shattering the shop window behind them. The street erupted in chaos, passers-by now screaming in terror. Leopold scrambled down the ladder after Isabel, nearly losing his grip on the steel rungs as his head disappeared below the level of the asphalt. The hole was already beginning to ripple shut overhead when someone shouted, "Larry Berry!" Against his better judgment, Leopold looked up. Samuels stood above them, his legs straddling the fast-closing fissure, his face warped grotesquely through the lens of his focuser, which was aimed straight at them. The lens brightened suddenly, blindingly, a spell firing off just as the hole snapped shut, muting Samuels' angry shout, blocking his cast, and suffocating the last rays of daylight. And then all went dark, and they were lost in an inky, bottomless gloom. Chapter 58. The ladder's cold metal numbed their hands as they descended, rung after slippery rung, into a black infinity. They still had no idea if what waited below was a dead end, or something far worse. After what seemed like an eternity, a whisper of light appeared beneath them. They stepped off the ladder onto a rough concrete floor and took a moment to catch their breaths. Leopold's heart was beating fast, and Isabel leaned back against the ladder, her cheeks flushed. They were at the end of a long, narrow corridor, weak lights embedded in rough stone walls that trailed away around a blind curve. The words Transportation Department was stenciled at their feet in orange spray paint. On the floor a bit further down the corridor was a bold, "No trespassing." Leopold glanced back up the ladder. "That thing you did to the parking meter. A stickle. It should render the meter inoperable for a few minutes," Isabel said, though she sounded less than certain. "I think." They looked at each other, then at the path ahead. They broke into a run. Before long, the corridor ended, opening onto a small, unadorned subway platform. They slowed to a stop, pushing for a moment to gaze around them apprehensively. The ceiling was oppressively low, the floor filthy and skimmed with trash. There were no wall tiles spelling out the name of the station, no turnstile, no benches. The only indication that this was in fact a subway station was the lone trolley car that sat waiting on a short section of track between two black and yawning tunnel arches. Looking at the car sent a dislocating shudder of déjà vu through Leopold. It was practically identical to the trolley he'd almost smashed into on Sunset Boulevard, only this one was painted industrial grey rather than a dull weathered red. Emblazoned below its roofline were the words "Maintenance Car." "Sunder has a subway?" Leopold said, finding his voice. Isabel was shaking her head as they approached the car. "Hardly. A short section of our trolley system goes underground, but there's no entrance around here. This must be a maintenance tunnel for emergencies. I've heard rumors about them, but I never knew for certain where any of them were." She shot him another wondering glance, which only deepened his unsettling déjà vu. Leopold felt certain that witnessing the man insert his tooth into the parking meter weeks ago could not have been random, that someone, or something, had wanted him to see it. He shelved the strange idea for later consideration, and together they stepped into the subway car. The interior looked like Angel's Flight without the stairs. Wooden benches spanned the car from end to end, and hand straps hung from the ceiling. Occupying the front was an unmanned operator station, surrounded by buttons and a big brass lever. "I don't suppose you have any idea where this thing goes," Leopold said, heading straight for the operator station. "It makes a bunch of stops," Isabel said, peering at a route map she'd located on the wall. Pasted below a peeling advertisement for insomnia curse reversal service. Franklin and Beechwood, Longpre and Seward, Santa Monica and Vine. "That's just a few blocks from the cemetery," Leopold called over his shoulder. He was searching for a token slot among the buttons, starting to feel hopeful again. "Right." She joined him at the panel. "Now, if we could just figure out how to start this thing." Leopold gave up on finding a slot and simply shoved the big brass lever forward with both hands. Immediately, the engine thrummed to life below their feet, and then, without any warning or PA announcement, the car let out an alarming series of creaks and lurched forward. They let gravity pull them down onto the nearest bench, going slack with a mixture of relief and exhaustion as the platform blurred out of view. The car juddered and swayed, pushing their shoulders together. Leopold felt a familiar lightheadedness as they passed through a veil and the windows went dark. When he'd recovered enough to collect his thoughts, something disturbing occurred to him. He had, in the space of half an hour, totally screwed up Isabel's life. The impact of this depressing realization must have been printed all over his face. "What's the matter?" she asked almost immediately, angling toward him on the bench. "We're okay now, we made it. And Emmett's going to be fine." "It's not that." Leopold hung his head. "It's just... Shit, Isabel, I'm sorry. They're not going to leave you alone after this. You lied to the cops, ran from them. They know who you are now, and that you've been helping me. And I'm some dangerous fugitive, apparently." "Leopold," she said, holding up her hand. "It's okay. I knew the risk I was taking." "What if they come to your house?" he insisted. "Try to arrest you? Norm's already on probation or something." "It's okay," she said again emphatically. Her look of concern was gone. Her expression was now one of soft surprise. "Uncle Norm and I have dealt with a lot worse over the years. He and I always take care of each other. You don't have to worry." Leopold gave a small nod. "I'm sure that's true," he said quietly, fixing her with a steady look. "But I will anyway." Her eyes rounded before she looked away, staring at her boots as she smiled. "Uncle Norm and I appreciate your concern." A small, sharp feeling flared to life inside him, a sensation both painful and joyful. Through the window behind her, a flurry of yellow sparks lit the dark, then vanished. When Isabel looked up, her face had changed. Her smile had become a grimace, her brows knit together, her hands had balled into fists. Leopold tensed. "I'll be fine," she said, waving away his concern as she grimaced in pain. Her cheeks had gone a deathly pale. She pressed one hand hard against his side. "What do you need?" he said urgently. "What can I do?" "You can stop freaking out," she said, her breath coming in uneven gasps. "And you can get me that vial." She nodded down at her belt. "With the black liquid." Hurrying, he flipped open her cloak. Secured with a snap between the loop rope and the old TV remote was a glass vial in a leather pouch. "This one?" She nodded. He unsnapped the piece that held it in place and drew it out. A splinter of wood floated in murky liquid. The vial was etched with the words, "Enceladus," and stoppered with a cork. "Need to drink," she said, her voice barely a whisper. He opened it, careful not to let any spill as the car leaned around a curve. She was fading by the second, and it was scaring the hell out of him. He slid a hand behind her neck and raised her head until her lips met the bottle. She took a sip, paused, and took another. Isabel squeezed her eyes shut and clenched her jaw like she'd swallowed poison, but after a few seconds her face began to relax. Her eyes opened. She took the bottle from his hand with a faint thank you, then took another sip of her own accord. She grimaced again as colour began returning to her cheeks. "Maybe we should get you to a hospital," said Leopold. "They couldn't help me anyway, and I'm fine now." "You're not fine. Nothing about that was fine. What just happened?" She took another sip, and then he realized. "The doppelbuddy," he said. She nodded, then squinted at him. "So Norm told you?" "Yeah, but I don't get it. That was a pretty minor spell, right? Not like portaling us across the city." Then again, in the aftermath of that escape, he'd been unconscious. He had no idea what torment she might have endured before he awoke. "I didn't think it would be this bad," she said. "But the effects of multiple casts are cumulative, like radiation exposure. I guess I needed more time to recover from last night." Shaking her head in frustration, she pushed up the sleeve that covered her right arm. Beneath was the maze of pink scars he'd noticed earlier, but now there was a new one, red, angry, and tracing a crooked line from wrist to forearm. "God, Isabel." His chest constricted at the sight. "Why do you... if you know it's going to hurt you..." "Most are from when I was younger, and angrier and stupider." She tapped a drop of the murky liquid from the vial onto her fresh wound. It hissed like a branding iron. She winced as a curl of smoke rose from her arm. "And sometimes you don't have a choice." He looked at her, letting a moment pass before he said, "What do you mean?" Isabel hesitated, returning his gaze for only a moment before her eyes darted away. She capped the bottle, stowed it back in its holster, then yanked her sleeve down again. "Isabel." His mouth pulled into a grim line. "Please, I need you to promise me you won't cast anymore." The windows flashed from dark to light as the trolley emerged briefly from underground, and for a moment, Leopold couldn't see her against the blinding blast of sun. He shaded his eyes, and when she came into focus again, she had a curious, slightly bemused look on her face. "What?" said Leopold. "Nothing." Isabel turned away as the window dimmed. "Look," he said with a sigh. "Whatever happens, whatever the situation is, we'll deal with it some way or another. You don't need to cast. You can count on me, I've got your back." Her eyes were heavy and uncertain, as if she wanted to say something but wasn't quite sure how to begin. Then she turned suddenly, to look out the window, where a new subway platform came flashing into view. She reached up to pull a cord that ran along the ceiling, and a sign came alight above the operator station. "Stop requested." With a squeal of brakes, the trolley began to slow. Chapter 59. With the empty subway car idling behind them, they hurried across another small bunker-like maintenance platform. A low corridor led to a steep concrete staircase. Halfway to the top, Leopold felt pressure build in his ears, then release as they passed through a veil. At the landing, there was a posted reminder about hiding focuses and extinguishing any visible spells. They pushed through a metal door and stumbled out into blinding sun and traffic noise. Leopold pulled his beanie low and donned his sunglasses. They were on Santa Monica Boulevard, across the street from a bustling car wash and a payday loan place, only a few blocks from the gates of Hollywood Forever. With a bang, the heavy door slammed shut behind them. It had no exterior handle and was built into the side of an aggressively anonymous 2-story building, its windowless edifice betraying nothing of the secrets that lay within. Leopold scanned the blank door and surrounding wall for a slot, a keyhole, or some other method of re-entry, but there were none. There'd be no going back this way. They headed for the cemetery, inexplicably beheaded palms stripping the sidewalk with their pencil-thin shadows. As they dodged pits and potholes, Leopold's spiraling thoughts returned to Emmett. Once they got his friend to safety and found a way to help him, Leopold would figure out what the device suctioned to his chest was for. There'd be time to discover what his mother had wanted from him, and what other purpose the Thomas Guide was meant to serve in his life, if any. There would be time for all of it, he promised himself. Leopold and Isabel walked alone into the cemetery. Through a flank of iron gates, past a wooden sign carved with an infinity symbol and words veiled from slack eyes. All realm, resting place. They crossed an expanse of manicured lawns where peacocks roamed, fanning their tail feathers for tourists, and hurried into the cemetery proper. Beyond a few rows of modest graves by the entrance, the cemetery was dominated by ostentatious crypts and tombs, their size appropriate to the egos of old Hollywood moguls and movie stars whose bones they contained. They avoided a tour group snapping selfies by the grave of Rudolph Valentino, then another meandering toward a mausoleum that housed the earthly remains of Judy Garland. Leopold and Isabel were headed for the southeastern end of the cemetery, and one of the newest celebrity interments, the grave of Johnny Ramone. His life-size guitar-wielding monument was unmissable, and Leopold had suggested Emmett meet him there because it was one of the few landmarks he was certain Emmett would know, even with his memory revised back to age 14. Leopold quickly checked the sky. No spying crows in sight. In the distance, he could see the wall marked at the border between Hollywood Forever and the Paramount Pictures backlot, a block-wide metropolis of sound stages and prop workshops whose tall, curving roofs gazed down upon a million graves. He'd always thought it the height of LA weirdness that such an insubstantial border separated the self-contained city of make-believe, the place where they shot CSI and Star Trek, from the final resting place of people who'd made them, as if the studio might one day reboot the Ten Commandments and resurrect Cecil B. DeMille to pop next door and direct a few scenes. Leopold pulled out his phone and checked for the new texts, but there were none. He'd been struggling to compartmentalize his anxiety about Emmett all morning, but they were so close now that he could no longer rein it in. They jogged around a grove of cypress trees and an enormous crypt, and then, despite pleas from Isabel to cool and not attract attention, Leopold broke into a full-on run. There, lounging in the grass beside the bronze statue of Johnny Ramone and his guitar, was Emmett. He wore one of their old homemade paladin costumes, black boots and a green army coat with a bandolier of fake ether vials strapped across his chest. He was munching from a greasy bag of Astroburger, a slightly concerning absence in his expression as he studied the clouds. Leopold shouted his name. Emmett snapped out of it, surprised, then visibly annoyed. Jesus, what took you so long? He dropped the Astroburger bag and hopped to his feet. I've watched, 3 funerals already. Hey, are you okay? How are you? What? I'm fine. You didn't talk to anybody, did you? Leopold, who grabbed him by the shoulders and was peering into his eyes. Who's the resident? What year is it? Emmett shook him off uncomfortably. Why are you being weird? And where's your costume, Mr. Berry? This whole video project was your... Emmett stopped mid-sentence. Hi, he said over Leopold's shoulder. Then, to Leopold in a whisper, Larry, girl. Isabel raised her eyebrows at Leopold. Mr. Berry, she mouthed, stifling a laugh. Leopold grimaced. Isabel, this is my old friend Emmett. Emmett, this is my new friend Isabel. Hey, she lifted a hand. I've heard a lot about you. What have you heard? Emmett said, looking both confused and suspicious. Wait, how do you two know each other? We, met at school, Leopold improvised. Emmett's eyes narrowed. Our school? Different school, Leopold said quickly. Hal's school. Your stepbrother goes to our school, idiot. Right, that's what I meant, same school. Leopold forced a casual smile, but he was starting to sweat. Look, Emmett, we have to get going. Let's pack up your tripod. But you just got here, Emmett shouted. We have a full day of shooting ahead of us. I know, I'm sorry, something important came up. Excuse us a sec, Emmett said to Isabel, then pulled Leopold around to the other side of Johnny Ramone's grave. Seriously, Larry, what the hell is going on? You come all the way over here just to cancel the shoot? He frowned, looking Leopold up and down. Wait a second, did you get taller? Leopold stalled. No? Emmett's frown deepened, but he let it go. Is this about her? He said instead. I mean, no offense, you're a handsome gentleman and everything, but your chances with a girl like that are insanely low. Forget it. I already got this shot framed up. Hey, Isabel said, coming into view. She looked wary. Everything okay? This is a private conversation, Emmett said irritably. Not when you're shouting, she pointed out. Everyone in this graveyard can hear what you're saying, and you should know, Leopold is only trying to help you. Leopold? Emmett barked a laugh. Nobody calls him that. His name is Larry. Emmett, Leopold hissed. Let it go, man. Whatever. Leopold was studying Isabel unkindly. Listen, Yoko, you're already in costume, so I guess we can pencil you into the script. You can call me Isabel. But it won't be a major part, so don't get your hopes up. All right, that's enough. Leopold grabbed Emmett by the arm, half dragging him across the grass. She's not wearing a costume. Emmett broke away from Leopold angrily. What the hell is your deal, man? I know apprentice paladin coat when I see one. The props and a belt are a dead giveaway, and you can't just drag me out of here. I'll make you still on the ground. Fine, grab your things, but we're leaving. I'll explain everything later, I promise. Right now, you're just going to have to trust me. Emmett dusted himself off, then shot Leopold a scouring glare. This is massively uncool, he said. At least tell me where we're going. To my place, Isabel cut in. She was already walking. Emmett's tripod gathered under her arm. We're, going to watch a movie. Hey, Emmett was pointing. She's taking my stuff. Leopold had forgotten how much Emmett used to shout when he was younger. Drove his parents crazy. I'm just helping, Isabel called back to them. Where'd you park your car? What car? Emmett scoffed. We can't drive. He turned to Leopold as they started after her, lowering his voice a little. Who the hell is this girl? How old is she? And what's up with everyone today? God, my head is killing me, he said, rubbing his temples. Leopold scooped up Emmett's camera bag without slowing. Everything has been so weird. My room is different. My phone's all different. You're hanging out with some hot girl who's probably going to rob us. Even my parents were acting weird today. My mom kept crying for no reason, and my dad refused to let me leave the house. I had to sneak out. Can you believe it? I took the bus here. Emmett paused, fixed on Leopold with a funny look, and said, You know, you really do look different. When did you start working out? There's a metro stop a couple of blocks from the cemetery, Isabel shouted from up ahead. Hey, Leopold said. I'm sorry you had such a bad day. We're going to fix this, I promise. But Emmett's eyes had gone glassy. A drop of blood leaked out of one nostril and blotched his costume. Leopold tried not to panic. Whoa, you okay? Your nose? Ah, crap, said Emmett, still walking as he pulled out an old bloody tissue from his pocket. This has been happening all day. I don't know what's wrong with me. Probably just the dry air. Emmett's faraway look had returned. Everything was coming unraveled. Leopold wondered whether they'd be able to guide him through a crosswalk without full-blown freakout. They'd just cleared a small hill when Leopold heard something that made him go cold. Larry! Emmett! Emmett frowned and turned around. What the... Mom? Dr. Laura Worthington was hiking towards them, small in the distance but fast approaching across the grass. That wasn't half of it, or even the worst of it. Striding alongside her was Richter. Chapter 60. Leopold, Emmett, and Isabel came to a crashing halt, the three of them toppling together, then freezing in a parody of a police lineup. Leopold wondered if he was dreaming. Then he heard his name, bellowed by his father. Larry, don't you dare run away from me. That nails-on-chalkboard voice, somehow both nasal and baritone, was evidence enough. This was no dream. I can't believe he used to scare me, Leopold thought. Isabel grabbed Leopold's arm. That's your dad? He met her eyes, then stared down at her hand on him, surprised. Yeah, he said quietly. Hey, you're cutting off my circulation. Sorry. She pulled away, then looked ahead. I swear I've seen him before. Leopold frowned. Really? Yeah, I don't know. His face looks so familiar. You probably saw him on a billboard, Leopold suggested. That big one on Sunset? Mom! Emmett hollered, then waved. Did you bring any snacks? Stay right there, baby. Dr. Worthington waved back from afar. Don't move. Okay, Mom. Love you. Dude, stop. Leopold yanked Emmett's arm down. We need to get the fuck out of here. Emmett reared back. Whoa, Mr. Berry, language. When did you start using the F word? Leopold narrowed his eyes at his dad. Yesterday. Emmett started giggling. He looked high, and his nose was bleeding again. His head swung around as he took in the scenery, then wobbled upright. Holy moly, your girlfriend has a lemon knife, he said, his words slurring a little. Can I hold it? Leopold cast a sidelong glance at Isabel. Take care of him, I'll be right back. Where are you going? She said, sounding panicked. She was looking from him to Emmett, who was making half-hearted efforts to snatch the knife from her holster. I have to talk to the parents, Leopold said. Convince them to give us some space. Then take this with you. She pressed something into his hand. There's an easy trigger. He felt the side of cool metal, the warmth of her hand, a spark of heat in his belly. For a fraction of a second, he forgot what he was doing. He blinked, looking at her. What is it? My uncle calls it a bewilder light. Theoretically, it will make them forget everything that happened to them in the last half hour. It was the size and shape of a small light bulb, but heavy, cast entirely in riveted gunmetal. Leopold raised his eyebrow. Theoretically? It hasn't been tested much. She had the decency to look sheepish. Maybe try not to use it if you don't have to. Leopold regarded the bewilder light uncertainly, nodded at Isabel, then jogged toward the adults. He was halfway there when Richter turned to shout something over his shoulder. Over the rise behind him, a pair of uniformed LAPD officers appeared. Leopold came to a sudden halt and swore under his breath. Richter hadn't only been in contact with the Worthingtons, he brought a couple of cops with him. Classic asshole Richter. Of course his dad would turn this into a teachable moment. Richter had probably made a deal with the police to keep Leopold in a holding cell overnight just to scare him. The only option now was to backtrack and bolt, though he'd wanted to reassure Mrs. Worthington that Emmett was going to be okay. It seemed he wouldn't get the chance. Leopold! He spun around at the terrified pitch of Isabel's voice. She was waving at him frantically. Run! Chapter 61. Leopold ran like hell, slowing just long enough to turn Emmett in the right direction. With Isabel grabbing one of Emmett's arms and Leopold the other, they broke into a mad dash. In a semi-dazed state, Emmett was pliable enough. They'd had no choice but to abandon Emmett's equipment in a heap by Johnny Ramone's grave. At their backs was a chorus of shouts, Richter's loudest of all, while Emmett registered a steady litany of complaints the status of the stacks from his mum, the unfinished bag of Astroburger, and the wisdom of leaving his gear unattended in a graveyard. Leopold knew it would have been simpler to bewilder the adults with Norm's device, but his conscience was too heavy. He'd be lucky if he could get Emmett's head right again. If he used untested magic on Emmett's mum and messed up her brain too, he'd never forgive himself. Distantly, Leopold heard one of the officers swear, then grumble about being forced to run. This was supposed to be my day off, groaned the other. Leopold exchanged a look with Isabel. Clearly, Richter had recruited a pair of bargain bin cops for the job. Running three across was slow, but Leopold knew Hollywood Forever well enough to make a few clever sudden turns that kept them ahead and mostly out of sight of their pursuers, all while answering Emmett's increasingly agitated questions with, trust me, I know this is crazy, but please trust me. Finally, after rounding a blind of trees and surprising a goth couple making out on Boris Karloff's grave, Emmett whispered, Okay, I trust you. In this sad, scared way, like he knew something big was wrong, and wrong with him too. A moment of clarity that, combined with Emmett's worsening nosebleed, made Leopold feel like dying. After that, they didn't need to coax Emmett along anymore. He was athletic and ran cross-country. Suddenly, they were having trouble keeping up with him. Is his nose still bleeding? Isabel asked, her words punctuated by chugging breaths. Yeah, Leopold said, lungs burning as he guided them through a weedy patch. They darted into a passage that squeezed between a long white mausoleum and a high wall, past a section with the graves all in Cyrillic, then through a clique of strutting peacocks that honked in haughty annoyance. Despite their efforts to stay ahead, Richter and Dr. Worthington's shouts hounded them stubbornly. More distantly, and much more occasionally, one of the cops would blurt out a half-hearted, Stop, kids! So far, the teenagers had done a fair job of keeping out of the adults' line of sight, but it seemed there'd be no evading them completely. Now, shouldering through a prickly boxwood hedge, Leopold faced a series of bad options. Hard to the left were a smattering of graves and a few big tombs in the shadow of the adjoining paramount wall, which were unscalably high and topped with razor wire. To their right was a wide-open lawn where they'd quickly be spotted. Far ahead was yet another unbreachable wall, but this one at least had an exit gate, beyond which lay Gower Street and the promise of escape. That would have been the obvious choice, except the adults seemed to have reached the same conclusion. Richter and Dr. Worthington appeared ahead of them now, crossing the broad stretch of lawn, and in the process, cutting off their only path to the gate. The two uninvested cops were still somewhere behind them. The adults were closing in from both sides. "Over here!" Emmett cried, beelining for a row of fancy crypts. "Emmett, wait!" They dove after him, ducking behind a glassy tomb that looked like something out of Architectural Digest, Eternity Edition, while Emmett darted over to its next-door neighbor, a miniature Greek temple ringed by black columns and mildew-stained statuary. When they caught up with him, he was gazing through the bars of its heavy door. Inside, Leopold glimpsed a cramped stone room that held graves stacked like drawers in a file cabinet. "Nice digs," Emmett said, his eyes wide with interest. "We should hide in here." "Bad idea," Leopold said urgently. Even if we managed to get the door open, all they'd have to do is look through the bars and they'd see us." "No, they won't. This one's veiled," said Isabel, studying Emmett with mild amazement. Emmett was busy gathering a bouquet of dandelions from the overgrowth. "There's an enchantment on it." "What kind of enchantment?" Leopold asked, throwing a look behind him. No sign yet that they'd been spotted. "I don't know." Isabel reached up to run a hand over some runic inscription beside a carved winged skull. "I think this says it wants some kind of payment." "Payment? Like money?" "I don't know," she said again, shaking her head. "I dropped out of the Lyceum a few months ago, never finished my Sunderworld seminar." "What?" Leopold turned stunned to stare at her. "Why would you drop out of the Lyceum?" She almost laughed. "Why are you so upset?" Emmett shoved between them, then pushed his freshly plucked dandelion bouquet through the doors. The flowers fell, without fanfare, onto the dusty interior floor. After a moment, the door returned a heavy clunk, groaning as some interior latch released. Leopold and Isabel stilled, then turned in unison to study Emmett in fresh astonishment. "How did you know to do that?" Leopold asked. Emmett shrugged. "Everyone likes flowers." Isabel, meanwhile, was struggling with the door. "Help, please!" Leopold moved quickly, shouldering it open with a hard shove. Stone grinding on stone, the giant door swung inward. They stumbled into a cold, stale-smelling room. Together, Leopold and Isabel pushed the door closed. From outside, the crypt had looked no bigger than a garden shed. Inside, it was easily 3 times larger. The walls were a checkerboard of grave markers, all washed in pale yellow light filtered through stained glass ceiling. Occupying the middle of the floor was a dark marble obelisk, taller than Leopold and covered in sunder runes and hieroglyphic pictographs. It was all weirdly beautiful. "Mr. Berry," said Emmett, looking around in wonder. "There's something super wrong with me, isn't there?" Leopold clasped his shoulder. "Nothing we can't fix, Mr. Worthington." Emmett nodded. His eyes, dull but darting, came to rest on the nearest grave slab. "Cool." "Larry! Emmett!" The sudden shouts of their parents made everyone jump. They couldn't have been far from the crypt's door. Emmett spun toward the voices, about to shout back, but Leopold shook his head seriously. "Not yet." And Emmett looked confused, then sobered, then scared. "We can't stay long," Leopold whispered to Isabel. "His mind keeps wavering in and out. It's making him unpredictable." Isabel nodded grimly, and they led Emmett away from the door toward the black obelisk in the center of the floor. Emmett rested his back against the pillar and struggled to wipe blood from his chin. "Oh, you're smearing it," Isabel said, digging a handkerchief from his seemingly bottomless cloak. "Let me help." Watching as she dabbed carefully at Emmett's face, Leopold felt something stir within him. He hardly knew Isabel, and yet here she was helping him, looking out for him and for Emmett too, with a sincerity that was so rare in his experience he could hardly define it. He'd make it up to her somehow. Afterward, Emmett looked better, if still worryingly distant. Isabel, too, was flagging. Her cheeks had drained of colour, and her hand was at her side again. She'd been hiding it well, but it was clear now she hadn't fully recovered from her earlier cast. She needed rest, and probably more of Norm's cooking. The other snacks they'd brought from the convenience store, he realized with dismay, had been left behind in the subway car. Leopold urged Isabel to sit, then crouched beside her, at the ready in case Emmett decided to bolt for the door. For now, Emmett stood puzzling at the obelisk, passing his hand over its arcane inscriptions. Isabel, meanwhile, had removed the black vial from its holster clasp again. She was sipping at it, wincing as the dark liquid passed her lips. Leopold noticed it was nearly empty. "What can I do?" he asked. "Do you need to lie down?" She shook her head. "I just need a little time. I'll be all right." She let her head fall back against the stone while the solution did its work. He peered at the vial in her hand. The etched glass read, "Ghost Ship Enceladus. Foremast. Pine." For reasons he couldn't explain, he committed the words to memory. There were more shouts from outside, distant now, then static from a faraway police radio. The adults seemed to be losing their trail. When Leopold's eyes returned to Isabel, she was staring at him with somber urgency. "Leopold," she said, quiet and intense. "Yeah? There's something I need to tell you. I wasn't sure I was going to. I mean, it's pretty serious and we only just met." They shared a look. In it, a charged and mutual acknowledgement. It didn't feel like they'd just met. "But if anything happens to me," she continued, "there's something I need you to know." "Nothing's going to happen to you," he said sharply, his reaction so visceral it surprised him. "I told you. You can count on me. I've got your back." She shook her head, smiling a little. "Like I said, I appreciate that. But we could get separated, or one of us could get arrested, or—" Her eyes darted away briefly. "You never know. And then you'll have to figure things out on your own." She was looking at his shirt now, with the circular shape outlined beneath it. "Isabel. Richard and Maria Alvarez." She took a breath, almost trembling with the effort it had required to summon those words. "Those were my parents' names." Leopold went still. "They were alchemists," she said, "and scientists. And before they died, I'm almost certain, they had something to do with creating that object on your chest." He blinked, a chilling theory crystallizing in his mind. "The lab accident that killed them. You think it had something to do with this?" His hand rose to touch it, the movement unconscious. She nodded. "Isabel," he said quietly, "if that's true, I think there's a chance your parents might have known my mum." She straightened then, her eyes sparking back to life. "What do you mean?" "The guide." His voice dropped to a whisper. "It belonged to my mother. She wanted me to find—" And then the crypt filled with a sharp, echoing sound that took them both by surprise. Because in that moment, it was the last thing either of them expected to hear. Emmett was laughing. Chapter 62. Isabel and Leopold leapt to their feet and scrambled around the obelisk. Emmett was pointing at something on the pillar and laughing his arse off, a sound so loud it reverberated off the walls. "Emmett, you have to lower your voice. Please, we need to be quiet." "Look at it," he was saying, still cackling. He nodded at the runic inscription. "It looks like a penis." Isabel cringed. "He thinks he's 14, said Leopold by way of apology, then led Emmett away by the arm. "It's all right, Mr. Worthington. Let's play the quiet game." "The quiet game is for babies." "Hey!" Someone was banging at the door. "Who's in there?" Leopold tensed. Shit. It was one of the cops. "Just us," Emmett called back. Leopold tried too late to clap a hand over his mouth, but Emmett shoved him away. "We're in here." Isabel shot Leopold a worried glance. Emmett got that faraway look in his eyes again and turned back to gaze at the obelisk. "Open the door, guys," the other cop now. "This isn't a game." They both sounded more irritated than angry, but the jig was up either way. There would be no hiding from them now. "Leopold," Isabel whispered. "Do you still have the bewilder light?" "Yeah," he said, patting himself down. "It was right." He searched one pants pocket, then the other, but came up empty. Her voice hollow, Isabel said, "You lost it?" Leopold was shaking his head, searching the floor in a panic. "I swear I had it. I don't know what happened. It must have fallen out my pocket while we were running." "I've got it," said Emmett, looking dazed but triumphant. He held up the bewilder light, fumbling it between his fingers as if it were a toy. I snatched it from Larry earlier. What? Emmett, give her back. No way, he said, souring. You two get all the cool props. She has a whole tool belt full of them. You can take the lemon knife. I want this one. You can't use a lemon knife here, Isabel said, as if that should have been obvious. Too many protective enchantments. Too dangerous. Too dangerous, Emmett mocked in a whiny voice. He tucked the bewilder light in his pocket. Whatever, Mom. Larry, Richter bellowed. Get out here before I ship you off to military school. The pounding at the door had only grown louder. Leopold's dad was his usual belligerent self. Emmett's mum, on the other hand, sounded like she was barely keeping it together. Emmett, baby, please. There's no need to keep running. No one's going to hurt you. The tremor in her voice said she wasn't so sure. Between bangs on the door, Leopold could hear Dr. Worthington assuring the cops that neither her son nor Larry were any threat. But then he heard the cops bandying about the words breaking and entering, and suddenly Leopold was wondering whether busting into a private crypt was some kind of felony. His anxiety kicked into higher gear. Then he heard Emmett say, Oh, hello, in this bemused sort of way, gathering up the fallen bouquet of dandelions before stalking toward the rear wall. Leopold, concerned, started after him. Emmett, wait, what are you... Without hesitating, Emmett arranged the limp bunch in a marble vase, a permanent fixture for displaying flowers, then grasped the base with both hands and twisted it 45 degrees to the right. A loud clank of gears issued from deep inside the stone wall, the sound such a shock it stopped Leopold in his tracks. A grave slab slid away to reveal a dark cavity the size of a small door. Leopold and Isabel gaped at it. A secret passage in a wizard's tomb, Emmett whispered, quoting a line from the Sunderworld theme. Cool Thursday. How did you do that? Isabel asked him. I read the instructions. Emmett pointed behind him at the obelisk and its indecipherable carvings. Isabel turned to look at them, then, with renewed fascination, at Emmett. You can read Sunder runes? I can only make out half of it. Emmett wasn't listening. Holy Swedish meatballs, he breathed. He bent down, peering into the dark of the door he had opened. Is that what I think it is? Leopold crouched, Isabel scrambling to join them. Deep within the gloom was a large, cube-shaped appliance covered in flaking white paint, a round door built into the front. It's a tumble port, said Leopold, his voice tinged with awe. Totally, said Emmett. With some prehistoric model, not like the one Max uses. Nodding in agreement, Isabel asked, Who's Max? No one worth discussing, Leopold said flatly, then pulled open the tumbleport door. It produced a loud shriek and a flurry of rust from its hinge. He made a face as a musty stench wafted out at them. Oh my God, can we use it? Emmett cried. Hell no! Isabel was already backing away, head shaking. Rich people used to put these in family tombs to make visiting the dead more convenient, I guess. But this one's got to be 80 years old. It's almost definitely broken, and even if it's not, we have no idea where it... Don't make us break down this door, Richter bellowed from outside. Emmett, Leopold cried. No! Leopold, who looked away for only a moment, had turned back in time to catch a glimpse of his friend's feet disappearing into what looked like a void filled with stars. Emmett had leapt into the open tumbleport. There was no time to react. The door had already slammed shut, the machine thrumming loudly as it worked. There was a crescendo of sound and a strobing red light that flashed from a dozen cracks in its rusting body. Leopold could have sworn he heard the receding cry of Emmett going, Whee! And then the machine fell silent. The lock tumblers clicked free. Leopold yanked open the tumbleport door. The cold blue mist billowed out, but the barrel itself was empty. Leopold lost it. He pounded on the machine. Where are the goddamn buttons on this thing? How do we get him back? Come on, come on! Isabel's steady hands drew him back. Leopold, stop. It doesn't work that way. Calm and focused, she kept a gentle pressure on his shoulder as she leaned around him, searching along the right side of the machine with her free hand. It should be here somewhere, she was saying. If I can just find the... She must have hit a button, because a moment later, a small receipt buzzed from a narrow slot on top of the machine. She tore it off, quickly read it, then offered it to Leopold. This is where he went. In blurry blue print, the receipt read, Clovis Memorial Home, Manchester Avenue, Inglewood, California. Inglewood. Leopold looked at her, cautiously hopeful. That's just across town. She was nodding. Don't worry, we can go get him. Relief flooded through Leopold in a disorienting wave. tempered just as quickly by a new worry. Only seconds after Isabel had taken the receipt from the machine and spat out another, this one printed in red ink. Out of order. As if to put the matter beyond dispute, the door fell off its rusted hinge and hit the floor with a deafening clatter. Oh, shit, Leopold said, appraising the useless machine with renewed panic. He remembered Emmett's fragile state. I just hope he made it. Leopold's pocket buzzed. He pulled out his phone to find a text from Emmett. That was amazing. Before Leopold could reply, Emmett sent another. You guys coming or what? As a fresh wave of relief hit Leopold, he typed, Stupid machine broke. You okay? Emmett returned a thumbs up emoji, then, holy crap, this place is like warm-up for caskets. What? Don't go anywhere, Leopold typed back. Be there ASAP. Leopold showed Isabel his phone screen. They shared a quick smile, this brief respite interrupted by a swell of commotion from outside. The bangs and shouts at the crypt door were now too loud to be ignored. They turned to face the exit, then each other. You ready? Isabel said. Leopold nodded. There's no way out but through. Chapter 63. They stepped into bright sun. Put your hands up, one of the cops shouted. Is this really necessary? Leopold heard Dr. Worthington ask. They're not criminals. They may have vandalized the crypt, the other cop was saying. Breaking and entering is a serious crime, Mom. Leopold and Isabel raised their hands above their heads, Leopold's heart thudding as the scene came into focus. The cops were a short distance away in the grass, red-faced and sweating from exertion. Richter and Dr. Worthington stood behind them, crackling with nervous energy. Where's Emmett? Said Dr. Worthington, her voice taking on a new urgency. Where's my son? Yeah, there were 3 of you. Where's the other one? Said the first cop. Leopold's mild relief regarding Emmett gave way to sudden crushing guilt. He never went inside with us, Leopold lied, mostly addressing Dr. Worthington. He said he wanted to go home. Leopold nodded in the general direction of the Gower Street exit. I thought I heard his voice. That was me, Leopold assured her. Emmett's okay. He ran off 10 minutes ago. She raised a trembling hand to her face in tentative relief. One of the cops shone his flashlight through the crypt door. After a cursory examination of the interior, he grunted. Yeah, it's empty. Then asked Dr. Worthington whether she wanted to file a report. She hadn't seemed to hear him. Her eyes, bright and angry, were focused on Leopold, and her voice broke when she said, Harry, I'm so disappointed in you. Leopold took it like a punch to the gut. Join the club, muttered Richter. Kid's been a disappointment since the day he was born. Dr. Worthington stiffened, then flashed a hard glare at Richter. You're one to talk. Richter looked stunned as she hitched up her purse and stormed off, but in her wake he found his voice. Now, officers, he said, addressing the cops in his reasonable man of authority tone, I realize my son has put you through a lot today, and while I appreciate all you've done, I prefer to handle the matter privately from here. The cop with the flashlight shook his head and slouched over to join his partner. Sorry, not possible. Things have escalated. Could be charges, the other one agreed, pulling out a notepad. We'll have to call it in, see what the sergeant says. Sure, you do that, Richter replied, nodding as if it had been his idea. Just tell him it's Richter Berry. He'll know who I am. As the cop rolled their eyes and one unclipped a walkie-talkie from his belt, Leopold wished more than ever that Emmett hadn't taken the bewilder light. Then Isabel hissed his name, tense and frightened, and when he saw her face, he knew things were about to get worse. He followed her gaze to a stand of nearby cypress trees. 2 men were striding out of the shadows. Stand down, fellas, we got jurisdiction here. The taller of them called across the expanse of grass. The one who'd spoken wore a blue Sunday police uniform and had a shaved head shaped like a bullet. The other, Leopold realized with a dull shock, was Samuel's, the detective they'd narrowly escaped in the Cash and Dash parking lot. Not surprisingly, Samuel looked pissed. Jurisdiction, my ass, the cop holding the notepad answered with a swagger. What division you with? Hollywood, answered Samuels. He and Bullethead quickly crossing the open ground. Bullshit, I worked Hollywood 8 years. The Sunday detectives were pulling out their focuses. Got our badges right here, Samuels said. Leopold, meanwhile, had been racking his brain for an escape route and searching around frantically for anything that could be useful as a weapon. His eyes met Isabel's. In the brief distraction created by the detective's sudden arrival, she lowered her arms and was starting to dip a hand into her cloak. They exchanged a look of shared understanding, then an almost imperceptible nod. Notepad Cop was now fumbling for his gun, while the other barked into his radio. "We have a situation. Unknown individuals, possible weapon." There was a sharp crackle as the detective's focuses brightened. Twin bolts of blinding blue light hit the Slack Cops, enveloping them in a tornado of incandescent particles. They jutted backwards like malfunctioning wind-up toys, then collapsed. "You!" Samuels boomed, stepping over the fallen cops with his partner. Richter had melted out of sight. "You're wanted on multiple violations of Sunder law. Code 806, illegal re-entry into a veiled zone following official banishment. Code 507-A, exposing Sunder secrets to Slacks. Code 653, suspected involvement in a magical explosion. And you!" His head snapped toward Isabel. "Code 1707, suspected possession of unregulated magical devices. And Code 180, aiding and abetting a fugitive." Leopold gritted his teeth. "Ugh!" Leopold gritted his teeth. He didn't particularly care if he had a rap sheet in Sunder, but Isabel had to live there. Despite her assurances to the contrary, it was clear he'd gotten her into seriously deep shit. "We're authorized to bring you in using force if necessary," Bullethead was saying, the grin on Samuels' face telling them that he'd enjoy nothing more. The Slack Cops, meanwhile, writhed on the ground like sleepers in the grip of a nightmare. Leopold glimpsed Richter peeking out from behind a crypt in the distance. He hadn't fled. Perhaps the sight of strange man threatening his son had activated some deeply held protective instinct. But finally, as the detectives raised their focuses at Leopold and Isabel, Richter turned and ran. The flicker of shame Leopold felt at the sight surprised him. He hadn't realized his opinion of his father could sink any lower. Samuels ordered Leopold and Isabel to lie down face first in the grass. The two of them had been exchanging quick, tense glances over since the Sunder police had appeared. But now Isabel gave Leopold the signal he'd been waiting for. A single, firm nod as she whipped a hand from her cloak, drew back her arm, and flung what looked like a small blackened apple at the detectives. Leopold sprang into motion, he and Isabel breaking into a run and sprinting around the rear of the crypt. A loud pop came from behind them, followed by violent coughing and cries of anger. Leopold looked back to see the crypt vanish in a cloud of whirling black dust. "Befogger," Isabel explained as they ran. "It's meant for use on Slacks, so probably won't slow them down long." As if to illustrate her point, a bright blue spellbolt shot past them and buried itself in the ground nearby, kicking up a fan of earth. "We just have to reach the Gower Gate," Leopold said, his adrenaline surging as they curved into a new section of tombs. "Then we find that metro station." "To Inglewood," Isabel readily agreed, "and Emmett." Leopold felt such a swell of affection for her then. He wondered if it was the adrenaline messing with his head. A squadron of pigeons scattered before them. Picnickers in a blanket dove for cover behind a bush, one letting out a delayed scream as Leopold and Isabel ran by. Leopold felt the beginnings of relief, nursing a delicate hope that perhaps the befogger had been enough. He and Isabel ducked reflexively as another cast streaked by, missing them by no more than a few feet. Leopold looked back to see the detectives chugging after them with grim determination. Far behind, but gaining. The befogger had bought them a small head start and covered the detectives in soot, but that seemed to be the extent of their injuries. More concerning, Isabel was beginning to flag. Her breaths labored, and her cheeks flushed. Leopold hooked an arm through her elbow and pulled her along faster. She looked at him sharply, then gave a nod of thanks. He guided them to the left, away from any semblance of a path, and Leopold hoped out of the detective's sight. They were coming into a section of comparatively humble crypts, and as the monuments shrank in size, so did the cover they would provide. They shouldered through a gap in some hedges. "What else can we throw at them?" Leopold asked, holding back some branches for Isabel before they resumed running. Isabel rummaged in her cloak, muttering with dissatisfaction as she dismissed several objects as useless against sparks. Finally, she pulled out a pair of cracked dice the color of strong tea. "Take these," she said between gasps for breath. "They're cursed deflectors. They won't work perfectly, the cop's magic is too strong, but it should screw up their aim a little." Isabel brought the dice to her lips and seemed to whisper something before passing them to Leopold. As he shoved them into his pockets, he noted that they were covered now in frost. Isabel went back to rummaging, and they passed a small reflecting pond, startling an old man feeding ducks. "My dazzler! Forgot I had this!" Isabel handed him a large glass eyeball. "It's already activated, so don't hang on to it long." Another bolt split the air beside them. This one so close it singed Leopold's arm, then hit a marble angel and knocked off a chunk of its wing. Angrily, Leopold turned and chucked the glass eye behind them. "Don't look!" Isabel cried, turning him forward just as a series of brilliant white flashes lit up the tombstones and trees around them. There was another scream from an unseen cluster of slacks, over which Leopold was pretty sure he heard Samuel shout, "You little shits!" He and Isabel broke through the shrubs and came into a rolling expanse of low graves. Beyond it, screened by a line of towering palms, was the Gower Gate. They ran by a clutch of tourists in socks and sandals, one turning to ask, "You shooting a movie or something?" Just as another bolt whipped past and sent them scattering in terror. The cast left a comet's trail of sparks scintillating overhead, and slammed into the line of palms. A man selling flowers screamed and ran as the fizzy tops burst into flame. Leopold's mind went briefly to the raccoon, the flaming sycamore tree, the unrecognizable life he'd been living just a few days ago. Their startling reverie was broken by the staccato chop of a helicopter and a loudspeaker booming, "Clear the area! Police action in progress!" The side of the chopper read LAPD. Nearby, 3 slack cops were herding a tour group to safety. "2 officers down," a voice cracked over one of their radios. "Unknown weapon." All hell was breaking loose. "Just a little further," Leopold encouraged Isabel, who was doing her best to keep pace. "Almost there." They passed beneath the palms and through a gentle curtain of fire. Shredded, flaming fronds raining down surreally, and came to a halt on the other side. The gate just ahead of them, their only exit, was now blocked by LAPD patrol cars. Cops were standing guard nearby, hands on their holsters. Leopold suppressed a clawing panic that threatened, briefly, to paralyze him. "Now what?" Isabel gasped. She was struggling for breath, exhausted from back-to-back sprints on top of her previous casts. Leopold worried he'd never be able to get her help she needed if they couldn't even escape the cemetery, and now the only way out had been barricaded. There were no other gates nearby, no doors at all, which meant they would have to make their own exit. "Isabel," he said, "do you still have that lemon knife?" "Yeah," she replied. "Why?" "I think I'm going to need it." She hesitated for a beat, then nodded. "Follow me," he said, steeling himself. They ran along the line of flaming trees, away from the gate massing with cops, and into a narrow lane crowded on both sides with tombs and monuments. Leopold needed to find an alternate path to the Gower Wall, which was tantalizingly close but blocked by a hulking mausoleum that seemed to go on forever. After another sprint, or as close to a sprint as Isabel could muster, they reached the end of the mausoleum, then darted down a root-gnarled path that wove through a maze of leaning graves. Leopold spotted the wall over the top of some tombs. They were no more than a stone's throw away from it now. When they came to a gravedigger's shed, rakes and shovels leaned against the corrugated structure and staggered to a halt. They'd hit a dead end. Leopold swore and turned them around again, only to find bullet heads stepping out of a literal hole in the air, which zipped close behind him as he raised his focuser. "Hands up," the detective said, his measured tone belied by a voice that trembled with barely restrained rage. He nodded at Isabel. "Don't even think about touching that belt." She and Leopold backed against the rakes and shovels, arms rising. There was nowhere left to run. "You chose an appropriate place to dig your own graves," Bullet had said as he stalked toward them. He was caked in soot, his face lacerated with angry red scratches, his uniform partially burned. Assaulting an officer multiple times with illegal devices, not to mention exposing who knows how many slacks to our magic. You might have been able to wriggle out of the charges we had you on before, but now... He stopped a few feet away, a cruel smile expanding. "Me and Samuels are going to make sure they put you away for a long, long time. Consider it my personal mission. You know what they do to teenage criminals in Salton State?" Leopold's voice was surprisingly steady when he said, "Go to hell." Isabel offered an additional enthusiastic "fuck you." Bullethead laughed ruefully, turning his gaze to Isabel. "You know what? You're right. I should start with you." He gestured to his face. "Your little toys gave me some fresh scars today, but don't worry," he said, adjusting his focuser. "Mine won't leave a mark. They'll just hurt like hell." Leopold didn't realize he'd grabbed one of the nearby shovels until he was swinging it. Metal clanged as it connected with the cop's jaw, crack of bone doubling with a crack and flash of his focuser. Teeth and blood flew. Bullethead went down. It all seemed to unfold in slow motion. Only when Isabel screamed did Leopold realize he'd been injured. He looked down to see blood darkening his left arm, then dropped the shovel, going numb with shock. Suddenly, Isabel was shouting, asking if he was okay. Could he still run? Leopold must have nodded. Pain shot through his arm as Isabel pulled him into a stumbling, lopsided dash back down the rutted path, the agony so profound it tunneled his vision. Whatever spell the detective had hit him with was gradually disconnecting his mind from his legs, so that he almost seemed to float through the blurring world. They rounded one corner, then another, Leopold only dimly aware of where they were going. Vaguely, he clocked Samuel's in his periphery. Then he saw Isabel throw something egg-shaped at him that hatched in midair. In a flash, a squadron of screeching black birds were attacking Samuel's, pecking and clawing as he screamed, "Back up! We need backup!" and thrashed at the birds with flailing arms. Somehow, they reached the wall. Leopold sagged against it and sank to the ground while Isabel dug frantically in her cloak. "Don't go to sleep," she said, hands shaking as she worked something out of the holster at her waist. "Just hang on, you're going to be fine." She was uncorking the vial of black liquid. "No," he gasped, his words slurring. "You need that." He cried out as she shook the last drops onto his wounded arm. The agony suddenly intensified, black spots blooming before him, and then the pain halved and halved again. After a moment, it had diminished such that he could sit up. "Shouldn't have," he managed. "I would have been in a coma in another minute." She looked him over, eyes narrowed with concern. "You need a doctor, but that should hold you for now." "Thank you." He nodded, feeling both his strength and urgency return in equal measure. Isabel slumped against the wall beside him. He could see that this last push had brought her back to the brink. Now she looked obliterated. He had to get her out of there. Leopold reached for her belt and drew the lemon knife carefully from its sheath. When Isabel made no protest, he knew she was suffering even more than she let on. He took a breath and studied the blade, which shone in the flat noonday sun. It made infinitely more sense for Isabel to be the one to wield it. She was practically an artist with the lemon knife, while Leopold barely qualified as an amateur. But Isabel was badly weakened, her ether reserves tapped. He'd have to rise to the occasion, for Isabel's sake, and for Emmett's. Gripping the knife in his good hand, Leopold staggered upright and plunged it into the smooth concrete wall. It sank quickly to the hilt. Clenching his jaw with the effort, he dragged it slowly downward until faintly a gleam of light shone through from the other side. Ether and concrete dust puffed from the lengthening gap as scenes from Gower Street began to appear through a thick, cottony webbing. Passing traffic, the odd pedestrian, the bold neon letters of the Astroburger sign. After a minute, the air sparkled with ether, and the hole was nearly large enough to wriggle through. "Larry Berry!" Leopold froze, then spun around. At the end of the alley of tombs stood the two detectives, bloody, angry, eyes afire. There was no warning before twin bolts slammed the wall near Leopold. The force of the blast launched him sideways into a crypt. His skull connected with stone and he fell to the ground. Somehow he clung to consciousness, lifting his pounding head to look for Isabel, who was getting to her feet seemingly unhurt. The two men laughed as they adjusted their focuses. Leopold tried to get his legs under him, then to stand. He was rewarded with an agonizing jolt of pain that unfocused his vision, until he saw something that snapped everything into laser-sharp clarity. Isabel. Torn butcher paper fell away from her hands. She unwrapped the mysterious package Jay had given her at the cash and dash. Now she gripped a small plastic circle. It looked like a toy you'd win from a claw machine on the Santa Monica Pier. Leopold knew better. Crappy though it might have been, a focuser was a focuser, and he'd promised Norm he wouldn't let her cast. "Isabel, don't!" he cried. A thunderclap rattled the tombs. Two blue bolts tore through the air toward Isabel. A ball of green fire answered, rocketing out of her small focuser, the force of it throwing her back against the wall. Isabel's cast blackened the grass beneath it as it flew, then collided with the detective's bolt in midair, creating a burst of light and a small shockwave that knocked both men to the ground. Leopold was stunned. Even with a cheap plastic focuser, Isabel was truly powerful. Dazed and spent, all color drained from her face, she slid down the wall. Not only had she cast another spell, she'd used the last of her healing liquid on him. Leopold tried to rise, to reach her, but his spinning head and trembling legs betrayed him as he nearly blacked out, sinking back into the puddle of blood that spread steadily beneath him. There was another violent rumble. He looked up at the sound. The bolts were returning. The detective's cast had overwhelmed Isabel's and somehow combined with it, and now the gathering force of all three was speeding back in her direction. 2 blue bolts and 1 green, woven together and writhing like a knot of electric eels, throwing off sparks as they went. Isabel's eyes widened in horror. 1 bolt probably wouldn't have been lethal. The effects of 2 would have been terrifying. The collective power of 3, however, seemed likely to kill. And this braided power was heading straight for her. All else dimmed. Suddenly there was only Isabel. Only the sound of blood pumping in Leopold's ears. He watched Isabel try to move, but it was clear she had nothing left. In fact, it seemed a miracle she could keep her chin up long enough to face death head-on as it approached. She looked almost regal then. Her cloak pooled around her like a dark green shadow, her black hair sparkling with ether dust. Leopold knew he was nobody. He wasn't a channeler. He wasn't chosen. No one had ever chosen him for anything, and somehow he'd allowed this to define him. He realized then, with a sobering rush of clarity, that he'd been waiting his whole life for permission to be somebody, to do something important. He was done waiting. It was strange how this simple decision seemed to inject fire into his veins. Where before he couldn't move, suddenly he was standing. And then he was running. "Leopold!" Isabel screamed. "No!" He launched himself at her, pushing her out of the way just as a green flare filled his peripheral vision and a sudden, searing pain exploded through his sternum. Leopold cried out, fist clenching as he lifted his head towards the fire. The bolt had struck him dead center in the chest. He was blinded, and consumed by a heat so furious it felt like he wasn't merely on fire. He'd become fire. And just as he was certain this strange agony was the last sensation he'd ever experienced, he realized the heat was emanating from within him. The object on his chest had absorbed the bolt with a mighty, excruciating burn. And then, in a flash, the heat was gone. He felt as if he'd been hollowed out. Leopold collapsed, his knees hitting dirt as Isabel struggled to her feet, the world darkening as he fell, with a dull thud, onto his side. He blinked desperately through a smear of black, blood seeping from his lips, his body consumed by pain. But when, finally, he saw her standing, he felt nothing but relief. Leopold Berry might have been a disappointment to the world, but he'd never again be a disappointment to himself. Epilogue. Leopold awoke in fragments, his body a heavy alien thing made of stone. He ached everywhere, but his awareness of the pain seemed to occupy some distant chamber of his mind. He heard the familiar metronomic beep of health monitors, shoes tapping a hard floor. Presences, felt more than seen, hovering around him. Muttering voices that faded in and out. Traces of a vanishing dream. He strained to decipher more than snippets. Hell of a mess. Takes weeks to fix anything. Never seen the boss so excited. But their words kept slipping away. His eyes split open to gauzy layers of sterile white, rough white sheets pulled up to his armpits, a white curtain screening much of the room from view, a nurse in white blinking down at him through a thick lens. Then a soft glow of pinkish dusklight, rays whispering through an otherwise darkened window as hazy figures passed back and forth. Leopold slid a trembling hand to his chest beneath the sheets. The cold metal ring occupied the same space it always did. Further inspection revealed a bandage wrapping his left bicep and a plastic IV dripping some dark but gently shimmering solution into his vein. Somewhat belatedly, it occurred to Leopold that he had survived. That he was in a hospital in Sunder, apparently, and the force of the braided bolt had not, in fact, torn a hole through him. Instead, somehow, was it possible the object had saved his life? The room faded out. When he woke again, he found that he could turn his head slightly, though to discover the source of the muttering voices. No. Below a muted TV bolted into a corner, a frizzy-haired man stood talking to a compact woman. He felt some slight relief at the familiar faces. One was Norm, pacing a narrow path in a Dare t-shirt and fleece pajama pants. The other was Executive Ramirez. Gradually, their words became clearer. The Sunder PD unit brought them in, Executive Ramirez was saying. Mr. Berry and Miss Alvarez put up quite a fight against 2 of our officers, they tell me, and caused a huge amount of trouble, which is why they had to call in an entire squad. Nothing the department couldn't handle, of course, she added briskly. Though we're still in the process of cleaning it up, memory revising all the slacks who witnessed the incident. The crowds, a number of LAPD officers. Leopold's eyes fell closed, though he kept listening. Kids aren't being charged, are they? Norm asked apprehensively. After what those cops did, I mean, talk about excessive force. That remains to be seen. For now, Miss Alvarez and Mr. Berry are under observation. Fortunately, once the object on Mr. Berry's chest was discovered, the matter was referred directly to me. He put on quite a show, I hear. Our officers were gobsmacked. They say they've never seen anything like it. From what I've heard and from what you've been able to tell me, this object will be of great interest to the department. Sure. Yeah. Norm sounded uneasy. I would have reached out sooner, but we only just discovered it. It's all right, I'm sure you had no idea of its importance. Leopold could almost hear Norm swallowing his pride. Right. There was a brief, awkward silence. Oh, hey, said Norm, snapping his fingers. What about Leopold's compadre? We've contacted our best memory specialists. They should be able to clear up Mr. Worthington's faulty revision by tomorrow morning at the latest. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'm late for a press conference. Her heels clicked past the bed and out of the room. A moment later, Leopold heard Norm's husky rasp beside him, then felt a heavy hand on his arm. Hey, lunch tray, said Norm. I saw you move a minute ago. You awake? Leopold forced his eyes open. Norm was looking down at him with a crinkly grin. Hi, Leopold croaked. Norm's smile expanded. How are you feeling? Like shit. Totally understandable under the present circumstances. Where am I? Leopold asked, his voice shaky. Cedars. Sunderwing. Been here about 36 hours. Leopold tried to move and regretted it immediately. Why am I not in jail? He asked. Or dead? Those are two really good questions, little dude. Norm's eyes hardened a little. That's what I'm trying to figure out, too. Leopold felt a twinge of fear in response, but he only nodded. Where's Emmett? Right over there, said Norm, gesturing to the opposite corner. After a painful turn of his head, Leopold was overwhelmed with relief to discover Emmett on a hard sofa, knees drawn up and head buried in a book, still wearing his homemade paladin costume. It was a sight so unexpected and welcome that Leopold surprised himself by laughing out loud, the action making him wince. Emmett looked up at the sound, blinking owlishly. Oh, hey, Larry, he said casually, then went back to his reading. He took a pencil from behind his ears, scribbled something in the book, and let out a triumphant little yes before tossing it aside. Immediately, he reached down to grab another from the pile on the floor. There must have been 20 or 30, surrounded by a sea of scribbled-on papers. Leopold felt his relief waning. Emmett was muttering to himself as he flipped the new book open and readied his pencil, an intense, hyper-focused expression on his face. Leopold hadn't expected Emmett's condition to miraculously improve on its own, but he seemed to be acting even weirder than before. He's been like this since they brought him in yesterday, Norm explained, answering Leopold's unspoken question. He's been asking for puzzles. It's all he wants to do. So we got him a ton of puzzle books. He hardly stops to eat. Since who brought him in? Leopold asked sharply. The cops. Isabel refused to leave the cemetery until Sunder PD promised to go get him. She knew exactly where to find him. Some funeral home in Inglewood. Leopold's chest tightened as he pictured Isabel, physically ill and hardly able to stand, arguing with a gang of angry cops about the safety of a kid she'd only just met. She was like no one Leopold had ever known before. Cops brought him here so we could keep an eye on him, Norm was saying, until the revisionists come to fix him up. They're sending their top people this time, so says Ramirez, instead of the idiots who botched the job in the first place. Finally, Leopold exhaled. The fact that the very organization responsible for breaking Emmett's brain was now tasked with its repair was a worry he didn't have the capacity to grapple with at the moment. But at least there was hope. Where's Isabel? He asked. Is she okay? Norm shifted his weight. She's down the hall in another room asleep. Got some recovering to do herself. Casting all those spells did a number on her, but she was lucky. He sighed. She'll be all right. Thank God, Leopold said quietly. You should get more sleep too, little dude. Doctor said that's the best thing for you. That, and, a shitload of healing spells. He rolled his eyes a little. I've been trying to get them to bring you some of my homemade ether bread, but they have idiotic rules here. Then he patted Leopold's arm, flashed another craggy smile, and excused himself to go check on Isabel. Emmett was still lost in his puzzle books, humming into their pages as he chewed his pencil. The muted TV was showing an infomercial for some kind of potion blender, its two familiar-looking hosts yammering silently as they poured broken glass and green liquid into its jar. Leopold didn't want to sleep. His mind was restless. He wanted to sit up, to think, to untangle, perhaps, some of the ever-accumulating mysteries that dogged him. After a minute of minor agony, he managed to ladder his back up against the pillows, but the effort exhausted him to such an extent that within another minute, he found he could no longer keep his eyes open. Gradually, he slipped into twilight. He didn't know how long he'd been asleep when a strange, slightly painful sensation tugged him fully awake. He opened his eyes to find that the sheet had fallen away from his shoulders, exposing the object on his chest. Weirder, Emmett was leaning over him, actively messing with it. "What the hell?" Leopold said sharply, trying to move out of reach. "Emmett, what are you—" "Stop squirming." Emmett's eyes were locked on the object. "I'm doing a puzzle." "It's not a puzzle. Ow, cut it out." "Wait, I've almost got it. Just one more click." With a sudden painful twinge, the object detached from Leopold's chest. Emmett held it up with a victorious smile. "Cool! You got any more of these?" Leopold gaped at him. "How'd you do that?" "Well," Emmett started to explain, but then he sucked in a breath and winced. "Ah, it's hot!" Then bobbled the object and dropped it. Leopold's hands shot out to catch it. The object spun as it fell, tumbling in what seemed to Leopold like slow motion. It flashed brightly, then appeared to shrink in midair. What landed in Leopold's hand was not the same object that had occupied his chest for the past few days. Now, a tenth of its former size, it could no longer be confused for a focuser. It had no glass anymore, no lens, no aperture markings around the circumference of its golden rim. It had come to rest in his open palm, against the ridge of his old moon-shaped scars. "Whoa, it's a ring," Emmett said in a hushed voice. Leopold felt as if he'd floated free of his body, as if he were watching himself and the whole strange scene from above. He tipped the ring into what weak light shone from the ceiling. Inset into the interior of the gold band was a small green gemstone. The moment it changed shape, Leopold had guessed instinctively what it was, but now he knew beyond a doubt. This was the prize his mother had so desperately wanted him to find, the powerful, mysterious object forged from ancient arcane magic, the thing that had, in all likelihood, saved his life. It was his father's wedding ring.